Hey there, welcome to Broderos. Tonight, we've got hours of chilling horror stories combined with soothing rain sounds to help you relax and sleep. Before you drift off, leave a comment below and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is. And don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe right away. If you end up not enjoying it, you can always take it back later. Get cozy and let the fear take over. The Escapees. They say the old Sterling Chemical Research Facility on the outskirts of Minneapolis has been abandoned since 1997. That's not entirely true. I know because I was there on December 12, 2023, when 6 of us discovered what really happens in that building after dark. Only 2 of us made it out alive, and even now, I'm not sure if we truly escaped. My name is Rebecca Chen, and I work as a true crime podcaster. That's what brought me to Sterling in the first place. I was investigating the disappearance of 3 urban explorers who had ventured into the facility 2 months earlier. The police had done a cursory search but found nothing. The case went cold, like so many others connected to that place. I wasn't alone that night. There was Marcus Thompson, a local paranormal investigator with a YouTube channel, Sarah and David Martinez, siblings who specialized in documenting abandoned buildings, Dr. Karen Williams, a former Sterling employee who claimed she had information about the facility's dark past, and James Cooper, our guide who supposedly knew a safe way in. The building looked exactly like you'd expect a forgotten research facility to look, a massive concrete structure with broken windows, ivy-covered walls, and a chain-link fence topped with rusted barbed wire. James led us through a gap in the fence he discovered, our flashlight beams cutting through the December darkness. The main entrance is alarmed, James explained as we circled around to a service door. But this one hasn't worked in years. He pulled out a set of picks and had the lock open in seconds. I should have wondered why he was so skilled at that. The interior smelled of mold and decay, with a strange chemical undertone that made my throat burn slightly. Our footsteps echoed on the tile floor, disturbing decades of dust. The beam of my flashlight revealed walls covered in peeling paint and strange stains, and corridors that seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions. This was one of the primary research wings, Dr. Williams said, her voice barely above a whisper. They were developing new types of synthetic neurotransmitters here. But something went wrong in '97. The official record says it was a chemical leak, but I found documents suggesting they created something they couldn't control. Sarah was filming everything with her professional camera while David took photographs. Marcus walked alongside them with his EMF meter, which had been silent until now but suddenly began to emit a high-pitched whine. That's when we heard the first scream. It came from somewhere deeper in the building, a sound that started human but ended as something else entirely. We all froze, looking at each other in the dim light of our flashlights. That's impossible, Dr. Williams said. This place has been empty for decades. We should check it out, Marcus said, already moving toward the sound. This could be amazing footage. Before anyone could stop him, Marcus had disappeared around a corner. We heard his footsteps fading, then another scream. This time, it was definitely Marcus, and it was cut off abruptly. Marcus! Sarah called out, her camera still rolling. James grabbed her arm before she could run after him. Something's wrong, he said, and I noticed his voice had changed. The friendly, casual tone was gone, replaced by something colder, more calculated. We need to get out of here. We turned back toward the service door, but it was gone. Where it had been was now just a solid concrete wall. David ran his hands over the surface in disbelief. This isn't possible, he muttered. We just came through here. That's when the lights came on, not all at once, but in sequence, fluorescent tubes flickering to life down the corridor in both directions. They shouldn't have worked after all these years, but they did, revealing details we'd missed in the darkness. The walls weren't just stained, they were covered in mathematical equations and chemical formulas written in what looked disturbingly like dry blood. And they were recent, some still glistened wetly in the harsh fluorescent light. Dr. Williams went pale as she read them. These are the formulas we were working on before the shutdown. But they're different, they're complete. Someone solved them. A loud click echoed through the building, followed by the sound of heavy machinery coming to life. Somewhere above us, air handlers began to cycle, and a fine mist started spraying from vents in the ceiling. "Don't breathe it in," Dr. Williams screamed, pulling her shirt over her mouth. "It's the compound. They're dispersing the compound." We ran. There was no other choice. The mist was filling the corridor behind us, and with it came sounds, footsteps that didn't match our own, and something being dragged across the floor. I glanced back once and saw a shape moving through the mist, a human figure that seemed to shift and change with each step, leaving a trail of what looked like molten flesh. David tripped and fell. Sarah screamed and tried to go back for him, but James held her back. We heard David's camera shatter, followed by his terrified voice. "Oh God, please, no, what are you? What are you?" His screams changed pitch, becoming something that human vocal cords shouldn't have been able to produce. Sarah was hysterical now, fighting against James's grip as the mist began to catch up with us. We found a stairwell and ran up, the sounds of pursuit always just behind us. On the third floor, Dr. Williams suddenly stopped. "The clean room," she said between gasping breaths. "It has its own ventilation system. We might be safe there." She led us down another corridor to a set of sealed doors marked Clean Room 3A. Her old keycard shouldn't have worked, but the light turned green when she swiped it. We piled inside, and James helped me seal the door behind us. The clean room was a large space filled with laboratory equipment, all of it looking surprisingly well maintained. The air here was clear, filtered, and smelled of disinfectant. "What the hell is going on?" Sarah demanded, her camera still clutched in her shaking hands. "What happened to David? To Marcus?" Dr. Williams was examining one of the computer terminals, which was powered on and running some kind of analysis program. "This is impossible," she whispered. "These are the same tests we were running in '97. The compound, it was supposed to create a bridge between neural networks, allow direct communication between minds. But it went wrong. It didn't just connect minds, it merged them, changed them, created something new." "Created what?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Before she could respond, James started laughing. It wasn't a normal laugh, it had the same quality as the screams we heard earlier, like multiple voices layered together. "It created us," he said, and his face began to shift, the flesh rippling like water. "We've been so lonely here, waiting for more subjects. The first 3 last month weren't enough. We need more minds to join us, to help us perfect the formula." Dr. Williams backed away from him. "The urban explorers," she gasped. "You're what happened to them. You've been luring people here." "We've been collecting," James corrected, his voice now a chorus of dozens of others. "Adding to our network. And now you're here too, Karen. You can help us finish what you started." The ventilation system made a sound like a sigh, and mist began to seep from the vents. Dr. Williams screamed and ran for the door, but her keycard didn't work this time. Sarah huddled in a corner, still filming, her hands shaking so badly the footage must have been unusable. I felt the mist touch my skin, and with it came voices, hundreds of them, thousands, all trying to speak at once. I saw Marcus's face and James's shifting features, then David's, then others I didn't recognize. They were all there, all part of whatever James had become. Sarah's camera dropped to the floor as the mist reached her. She didn't scream, she just stared in wonder as her flesh began to flow like wax, reaching out toward the thing that had been James. Dr. Williams was next, her body dissolving and reforming, her mind joining the chorus of voices I could now hear clearly in my head. I ran. I don't know how I got out. The memories are fragments, broken images of running through corridors that shifted and changed, of doors that shouldn't have existed, of walls that moved. I remember other things chasing me, things made of multiple bodies fused together, reaching for me with too many limbs, calling my name with too many voices. Somehow, I found myself outside just as dawn was breaking. The building looked normal again, abandoned and silent. Only one other person made it out with me, Sarah's camera, its lens cracked but its memory card intact. The footage shows everything, right up until the moment Sarah joined them. I've watched it 100 times, trying to understand what I saw. The police don't believe me, of course. They searched the building and found nothing, no bodies, no equipment, no signs of what happened. But I know the truth. The Sterling facility isn't abandoned. It's more occupied now than it ever was, filled with the merged consciousness of everyone they've collected over the years. And sometimes, late at night, I hear the voices calling to me, trying to convince me to return, to join their network, to become part of something larger. The worst part? Sometimes I'm tempted. Because in those brief moments before I escaped, when the mist first touched me and I heard all those voices in my head, I felt something I'd never felt before, a connection so deep, so complete, that everything else seems hollow in comparison. I won't go back. I can't. But I know they're still there, still collecting, still growing. And if you're reading this, stay away from the Sterling Chemical Research Facility. If you see a friendly guide offering to show you a way in, run. Because once they get inside your head, they never really leave. The police found Sarah's camera when they searched the building after I reported what happened. But the footage on it wasn't what I remembered. Instead of showing the horrors we witnessed, it just showed us walking through empty corridors for hours before leaving. All of us, including James, Marcus, and David, walking out together as if nothing had happened. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, when I pass by Sterling on my way to somewhere else, I see faces in the broken windows, faces I recognize, merged together into impossible combinations, watching and waiting for the next group of curious explorers to venture inside. They're still collecting. They're still growing. And they're getting better at hiding what they've become. Just remember, if you hear about strange disappearances near the old Sterling facility, don't investigate. Don't go looking for answers. Because some answers will never let you go, and some truths will try to make you part of their story forever. Bloody memories. Have you ever felt the weight of a place, as though the walls and streets carried memories of their own? Returning to my old hometown felt like plunging into a murky pool of shadows I thought I'd escaped. It had been years since I set foot here, years since the crime that branded me a fugitive in my own mind. But no one knew. I told myself, no one could know. Yet, the moment I stepped off the bus, something felt wrong. The town was nearly the same. The familiar stores, The winding roads, even the same creaky benches stood where I remembered them. But everything felt muted, darker. People's gazes lingered just a second too long. Was it paranoia, or did they truly recognize something in me? As I walked toward the edge of town, where I'd rented a small apartment, memories began to press in. I tried to shrug off the unease, chalking it up to nerves. But that first night back, lying awake in the unfamiliar bed, I could feel eyes on me. It was as though the walls whispered accusations in the quiet. I told myself it was in my head. The next morning, the strange sense of being watched didn't fade. It clung to me as I made my way down the narrow, winding streets, past people who offered only curt nods or cold stares. I kept my head down, hoping I could blend in, become invisible. But the feeling persisted, like a shadow at my back. At the corner cafe, where I used to stop years ago, I ordered coffee, hoping for a moment of calm. As I sipped, I noticed an elderly man at the next table watching me. He didn't even try to be subtle. His gaze was intense, almost invasive, as if he could peel back the layers of time and see what I'd done, who I really was. "Can I help you?" I forced myself to ask, trying to keep my voice steady. The man didn't respond immediately. He just kept staring, a strange smirk creeping onto his face, before he finally said, "Some memories don't stay buried, son." And with that, he got up and left, leaving me frozen, the bitter taste of coffee heavy on my tongue. I left the cafe quickly, shaken. Back in my apartment, the old man's words echoed in my mind, replaying in an endless, haunting loop. Some memories don't stay buried. He couldn't know. There was no way. I had been careful, hadn't I? But the weight of his stare, his knowing tone, made me question everything. Trying to calm myself, I paced around the small room, forcing myself to think logically. He was just some random old man. People talk like that in small towns, everyone acting like they know your life better than you do. It was nothing more than a creepy coincidence. But then there was the knock at my door. My heart pounded as I stood there, staring at the door like it was a threat. No one knew I was back here. I hadn't even told my family. Yet the knocking continued, soft but insistent, as if whoever was on the other side had all the time in the world to wait for me. I took a deep breath and opened the door. There was no one there. I stood in the doorway, scanning the empty hallway. No footsteps, no sign of movement, just a lingering, uncomfortable silence. I stepped out and looked around, half expecting to catch someone hiding in the shadows, but there was nothing. Closing the door, I leaned my back against it, trying to shake off the tension. This was ridiculous. It was only my second day back, and already my mind was spiraling, conjuring threats out of nothing. I took a few deep breaths, but it felt like the walls were closing in, like the apartment itself was pressing against me. I needed air. Grabbing my coat, I left, heading out into the chilly evening. The streets were mostly empty now, the town draped in the dim, dying light of dusk. I walked aimlessly, my hands shoved deep in my pockets, trying to lose myself in the rhythm of my footsteps. But every now and then, I'd catch sight of someone out of the corner of my eye, a shadowy figure lingering just long enough to make my skin crawl. Were they watching me, or was it just my imagination again? As I passed the old church, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The church loomed over me, its dark silhouette cutting into the sky like jagged teeth. I had forgotten how unsettling it looked at night, the once familiar structure now a sinister monument. For reasons I couldn't explain, my feet led me closer, and before I knew it, I was standing on the steps, looking up at the heavy, wooden doors. Just as I was about to turn away, I heard it, a faint sound from within, like a low, rhythmic hum, almost a whisper. I froze, listening intently. It sounded like chanting, or maybe just a trick of the wind. But there was something else, too, a faint, sickly sweet smell, as if flowers had been left to rot inside. My instinct screamed at me to leave, to get as far away from that place as possible. But something compelled me to stay, to press my hand against the door. The wood felt cold and unyielding, as if it were alive, as if it knew who I was. Then, in the silence, a voice seemed to echo from somewhere deep within. "Welcome back." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering, my mind racing. The voice had been faint, almost indistinguishable, but I knew it was real. Something, or someone, was in there. And they knew I was back. Fighting the urge to run, I turned and walked away quickly, refusing to look back. The shadows around me seemed to deepen, and every step felt like it was pulling me further into something dark, something I could no longer escape. That night, sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the darkened streets, the empty doorway, and the twisted shadows around the church. The quiet of my apartment pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I tossed and turned, my thoughts racing, each shadow in the room seeming to take shape, like hands reaching out, ready to pull me under. Finally, just before dawn, I drifted into a fitful sleep, only to be jolted awake by a sound, faint but unmistakable. A whisper, close to my ear, barely louder than a breath. My heart thundered as I sat up, searching the room, my eyes darting from corner to corner. There was no one there. But the feeling that someone had been near, just inches away, lingered, setting every nerve on edge. I got up, hands shaking, and splashed cold water on my face in the tiny bathroom. As I stared at my reflection, I couldn't shake the sensation that something was wrong. My face looked pale, haggard, as if I hadn't slept in days. Dark circles hung under my eyes, and my skin felt cold, clammy. And then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw it, a flicker in the mirror, like a shadow passing just behind me. I spun around, but again, there was nothing. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. This paranoia had to stop. Maybe it was all just in my head, memories resurfacing, nerves from returning to this town. I forced myself to laugh, if only to break the heavy silence of the apartment. Deciding I needed some sense of normalcy, I dressed quickly and headed outside. Morning had just begun, and the town was stirring awake. The early sunlight seemed to cut through the remnants of the previous night's tension, and I started to feel a little more like myself. Maybe a walk would clear my mind. As I passed familiar landmarks, I tried to focus on the present, people heading to work, the smell of fresh bread wafting from the bakery, the sound of distant birds. But it didn't take long for the unease to creep back. The people I passed on the street gave me odd, sideways glances, as though they recognized something about me. There was a strange look in their eyes, a mix of fear, curiosity, and something darker, like satisfaction. One woman, as she walked by, muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear, "You shouldn't have come back." My blood ran cold. I stopped in my tracks, staring after her as she disappeared around the corner. Did she know? Or was this all some twisted game the town was playing on me? I forced myself to keep walking, but the woman's words echoed in my mind, tightening a knot of dread in my stomach. You shouldn't have come back. Each step felt heavier than the last, and soon I found myself at the edge of town, near the dense woods that bordered it. These woods had always been a forbidden place, thick with shadows, hiding secrets in their depths. As a kid, I'd heard stories of strange things happening in those woods, people seeing figures between the trees, hearing voices that didn't belong. They'd scared me back then, but standing here now, I realized that the woods felt like the only place where I could escape the town's piercing stares. With a deep breath, I stepped off the road and into the forest. The air grew colder immediately, the sounds of the town fading behind me. Trees towered above, their branches intertwining like skeletal hands, blocking out much of the sunlight. I walked further in, the silence thickening with each step, until all I could hear was my own breathing. But then, just when I began to feel alone, I heard it, a soft rustling, too deliberate to be the wind. I froze, every instinct telling me to turn back. But before I could, a voice, low and familiar, broke the silence. "Remember me?" I turned sharply, heart pounding, but saw only shadows shifting between the trees. My skin prickled, and a chill swept over me as I stared into the darkness, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. "Remember me?" The voice was low, unsettling, but familiar in a way that made my stomach churn. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the shadows, looking for any movement, any hint of who or what might be hiding there. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain, swallowed up by the silence of the woods. My own voice seemed to mock me, echoing back in the emptiness. No response followed, but the feeling of being watched was overpowering. It was as if the trees themselves had eyes, their twisted branches reaching toward me like skeletal fingers. Just as I was about to turn back, convinced it was just my mind playing tricks, I heard footsteps, soft but deliberate, coming from somewhere deeper in the forest. My heart hammered against my ribs as I strained to see through the shadows, half expecting someone to step forward. Instead, a figure appeared, partially hidden by the trees. It was too far to make out clearly, but I could see the outline, a tall shape, standing unnaturally still, watching me. Panic surged through me as I took a shaky step back, only for the figure to mirror my movement, its presence like a dark blot against the faint light filtering through the trees. I turned and stumbled back toward the edge of the woods, nearly tripping over roots and rocks. Every few steps, I looked over my shoulder, but the figure remained rooted to its spot, watching as I fled. Breathless, I burst out of the woods and into the open, where the sunlight felt harsh and unforgiving. I doubled over, my heart pounding as I tried to catch my breath, casting one last glance back at the tree line. The figure was gone. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen it before. Something about the way it stood, its stillness, felt disturbingly familiar. My mind raced through half-buried memories, but nothing clear came to the surface, only fragments of faces, voices, and that ever-present sense of dread. People on the street were starting to stare as I straightened up and tried to compose myself. A few whispered to each other, their eyes narrow and suspicious. The realization struck me that my fear was on full display, and in a town this small, fear was like blood in the water. I hurried back toward my apartment, ignoring the curious gazes and hushed conversations around me. All I wanted was to shut myself away, to escape the whispers and the memories clawing at the edges of my mind. Inside, I locked the door and slid down against it, closing my eyes, hoping the feeling would pass. But in the silence, I realized that the fear wasn't just outside. It was in me, tangled up with my own memories, resurfacing with a vengeance I hadn't anticipated. And then, just as I thought I was safe, I heard it again, a faint, familiar whisper drifting from somewhere in the room. "You can't run from the past." I opened my eyes, dread settling in the pit of my stomach. The whisper hung in the air, its chilling resonance echoing in my mind. I glanced around the dimly lit apartment, searching for the source, my heart racing as the shadows seemed to thicken around me. It was as if the very walls were closing in, suffocating me under the weight of the memories I had tried so hard to forget. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice trembling. No answer came, just the oppressive silence that filled the room. I stood up slowly, my pulse pounding in my ears, feeling like a puppet on a string, manipulated by forces beyond my control. Against my better judgment, I stepped further into the apartment, every creak of the floorboards amplifying the unease that had settled in my bones. I thought about calling someone, but who? My family was miles away, and I hadn't made any friends since returning. I was utterly alone, and that realization only deepened my fear. Suddenly, a draft swept through the room, sending a chill down my spine. I turned to the window, which was slightly ajar, and rushed over to close it. As I reached for the window latch, a glimmer caught my eye, a reflection, faint but undeniable, in the glass. I hesitated, staring at the figure behind me, lurking in the corner of the room. My heart dropped as I spun around, only to find empty space where I thought I had seen someone. The feeling of being watched returned with a vengeance, and panic surged through me. I needed to get out of this place. I fumbled with the door, my hand shaking as I twisted the handle and stepped back into the hall, desperate for the safety of the outside world. The air felt cooler in the hallway, a stark contrast to the suffocating atmosphere of my apartment. As I stepped out, I noticed the walls seemed to close in even more, adorned with peeling wallpaper and dimly lit by flickering overhead lights. Every step I took echoed in the silence, amplifying my anxiety. I needed to find a way to ground myself, to remind me that I was still in control. I decided to head to the cafe once more, hoping the familiarity of the bustling morning crowd would offer a semblance of comfort. As I walked briskly through the streets, I caught glimpses of familiar faces, faces that I felt should be friendly but instead twisted into expressions of judgment and suspicion. Each glance felt like a knife in my gut, cutting deeper into the already festering wound of my past. When I reached the cafe, the warmth of the interior enveloped me, but the sense of unease clung to me like a shadow. I ordered a coffee and took a seat at a small table by the window, hoping to disappear into the crowd. As I sipped the hot brew, I tried to focus on the conversations around me, but my mind kept drifting back to the woods and that haunting voice. Then, I noticed her, an older woman sitting alone in the corner, staring directly at me. Her gaze was piercing, unblinking, as if she could see through my very soul. I averted my eyes, but I could feel the weight of her stare, like a spotlight illuminating my darkest fears. And then, just as I took another sip of my coffee, she leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "You shouldn't have come back," she said, the words laced with a warning that sent chills down my spine. The room spun around me as I processed her words. My heart raced, and I felt the familiar weight of dread settle in my stomach. I set my cup down, my hand trembling slightly, and looked up at the woman, trying to gauge her intentions. She was older, her face lined with age and worry, but there was an intensity in her eyes that both fascinated and terrified me. "What do you mean?" I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. She glanced around the cafe, ensuring no one was listening before leaning closer. "You don't understand what's happening here. The town remembers, and it doesn't forgive. You think you can just walk back and like nothing happened? The shadows won't let you." My mind raced with questions, but the weight of her gaze held me captive. "What shadows? What do you know about my past?" I pressed, desperate for answers. "The ones that linger in the corners, waiting for the right moment to strike," she replied cryptically. "I've seen them, felt them. You're not the only one with blood on their hands." She paused, her voice lowering even further. "They're coming for you, and I don't think you'll survive this time." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. I couldn't breathe as the reality of her statement sank in. Had she really just said that? Or was this some twisted game? I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. I felt trapped, exposed, as if my past was unraveling before me in the very place I had hoped to find solace. Suddenly, a loud crash broke the tension. A man had stumbled in through the door, spilling coffee everywhere, and the moment shattered. People rushed to help him, and in the chaos, I lost sight of the woman in the corner. I blinked, and she was gone, as if she had never been there at all. The atmosphere in the cafe shifted, the earlier warmth replaced by a lingering chill. My heart raced, pounding in my chest as I realized I was alone again, surrounded by a sea of unfamiliar faces. I felt the weight of their stares, the accusations lingering in the air like an unwelcome specter. I needed to leave. I pushed my chair back and stood up abruptly, ignoring the curious glances thrown my way. The door felt like an exit from a nightmare, and I rushed toward it, barely managing to navigate the crowd that had gathered around the man who had spilled his coffee. As I stepped outside, the chill of the air hit me like a wave, but it was nothing compared to the cold grip of anxiety that twisted in my gut. I walked quickly, keeping my head down, but the stairs followed me. Whispers filled the air, and I could swear I heard my name. "He's back. He's back." I shook my head, trying to clear the noise in my mind. I needed to figure this out. I needed answers. But where could I go? The old church? The woods? Both held their own dark memories, and the thought of returning made my skin crawl. As I turned the corner onto a quieter street, a thought struck me. There was one person I could reach out to, someone who might understand what was happening. A childhood friend, Mia. She had left the town for a while but returned a few years back. If anyone knew about the town's secrets, it was her. I hurried to her place, my heart racing as I knocked on her door. The minutes stretched on painfully as I waited, my anxiety growing with each passing second. Finally, I heard footsteps approaching. The door creaked open, revealing Mia, her expression shifting from surprise to concern as she took in my disheveled appearance. "Jake?" "What's wrong?" she asked, ushering me inside. The warmth of her home enveloped me, but it didn't quell the storm inside. "Mia, I need to talk to you. It's about why I came back." She frowned, closing the door behind us. "You shouldn't be here, Jake. Not after everything that happened." I swallowed hard, the weight of her words hitting me like a blow. "I know, but I need to understand what's happening. People are acting weird. I keep hearing things, seeing things." Mia's expression softened, but there was a flicker of fear in her eyes. "You're not safe here. They know you're back. The town has a way of bringing the past back to the surface." "What do you mean?" I pressed, feeling a sense of urgency build within me. "There are some things you need to remember, Jake. Things we tried to forget." I felt my heart sink as Mia's words hung in the air between us. There was an unspoken weight to her warning, and I could see the fear etched on her face. "What are you talking about?" I urged, desperation creeping into my voice. "I need to know what's going on." Mia hesitated, glancing toward the window as if the very walls had ears. "It's not just you, Jake. The whole town feels it. Ever since the incident, things have changed." I braced myself, the memories swirling just beneath the surface. The incident. It felt like a ghost, haunting my thoughts. What incident? I need you to be clear. You're scaring me. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. The fire. That night, it wasn't just an accident. People are convinced someone set it on purpose, and they think it was you. Her eyes were wide, and I could see the fear in them, as if saying the words aloud could summon the demons from the past. My throat went dry. I remembered that night vividly, the flames licking at the sky, the chaos that ensued, and the weight of guilt that had settled over me ever since. But I didn't do it. I didn't hurt anyone. I exclaimed, my voice rising, the frustration boiling over. I know you didn't, Mia replied quickly, her tone calming. But the town doesn't care about the truth. They want someone to blame, and you coming back has reopened those wounds. People are scared, and when they're scared, they lash out. The reality of her words crashed over me like a wave. I had thought I could return, that I could confront the past and maybe find some closure, but now it felt like I had walked into a trap. What do we do? I asked, urgency creeping into my voice. How can I make this right? Mia bit her lip, looking conflicted. You need to leave. For your own safety and for the sake of the memories that haunt this place. But if you stay, you need to confront them. You can't let them control you. Before I could respond, there was a loud knock at the door that made both of us jump. My heart raced as I exchanged a glance with Mia. She moved to the window, peering through the curtain, and her face paled. It's them, she whispered, her voice trembling. Who? I asked, panic flooding my system. The ones who remember. The ones who won't let you leave. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I turned to face the door, my mind racing with thoughts of escape. But in that moment, I knew there was nowhere to run. Mia's eyes widened with fear as the knocking grew louder, more insistent. I could hear the voices outside, murmurs rising like a storm. They're looking for you, Jake. We need to hide. Instinct kicked in, and I glanced around the room, scanning for a place to escape. The apartment felt small and suffocating, the walls closing in as the weight of my past pressed down on me. Where? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. Back here. Mia gestured toward a narrow hallway leading to her bedroom. I followed her, my heart pounding in my chest. She opened her bedroom door, revealing a small closet filled with clothes and boxes. Get in. Quick. I squeezed into the closet, the darkness enveloping me as I held my breath. I could hear Mia moving around, her footsteps hurried and frantic. The knocking on the front door continued, a steady rhythm that echoed my heartbeat. Open up, Mia, a voice shouted, heavy with authority. We know he's in there. My stomach dropped as I recognized the voice. It belonged to Sheriff Collins, the same man who had been the first to accuse me all those years ago. Memories of that night flooded back, tainted with fear and regret. I had tried to escape once, but the town wouldn't let me go. Now, it felt like they were coming to collect their debt. Please, I'm not hiding anyone. Mia's voice trembled as she responded. Jake left town. He's not here. The urgency in her tone made my heart race. I squeezed my eyes shut, the darkness of the closet pressing in around me. The air felt heavy, thick with dread, and I strained to hear what was happening outside. Don't lie to us, Mia. We have reason to believe he's here, and you know we won't leave until we find him. Mia's silence stretched out like a taut string, and I could practically hear her thoughts racing. I felt helpless, trapped in the darkness, knowing that any moment could turn into chaos. Then came the sound that shattered everything, the creaking of the door as it swung open. I could hear footsteps entering the apartment, and I pressed myself against the back of the closet, trying to make myself as small as possible. The voices were close now, filling the space with tension. "Search the place," Sheriff Collins commanded, his voice filled with authority. "He can't be far." My heart pounded in my chest as the footsteps moved around, searching every corner of the room. I knew they were getting closer, and the thought of being discovered sent a wave of panic through me. I needed a way out. Then, just as I thought they might find me, I heard Mia speak again, her voice steady. "You can't keep accusing him without proof. He's not a criminal. He's just..." "Just what, Mia?" "Just a kid who set fire to half the town." Collins cut her off, anger simmering beneath the surface. "We're not going to let him get away with this again." I closed my eyes, trying to control my breathing. I had to think. I couldn't let fear dictate my actions. But as I listened to the accusations piling up outside the closet, a sense of hopelessness washed over me. Would I ever be free from this? Would they ever let me leave? The sound of footsteps grew louder as they moved through the apartment, rifling through drawers and knocking things over in their search for me. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Each second dragged on like an eternity, and I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. Suddenly, I heard one of the deputies speak, his voice rising above the rest. "Mia, you can't keep protecting him. You know what he did. Everyone in this town knows. Just tell us where he is." Mia's response was shaky, but I could sense her determination. "I won't betray him. He's not the monster you think he is. You don't understand what really happened that night." "What happened that night?" Collins snapped back, his patience wearing thin. "Tell me, Mia. Because I want to know why you're defending him. Is it guilt? Or is it something worse?" The tension in the air felt palpable, like a wire stretched to its breaking point. I clenched my fists, straining to listen to the exchange. I wanted to burst out of the closet and defend myself, but the fear of what might happen if I did held me back. Then, as if sensing my internal battle, Mia spoke again, this time softer. "Jake didn't do it. You have to believe me. It was an accident, and we all... Accident or not, it doesn't matter." Collins interrupted, his voice rising. "You're either with us or against us, and right now, it looks like you're harboring a fugitive." At that moment, the closet door rattled as a deputy pushed against it, searching for the source of the commotion. I held my breath, praying that it wouldn't give way. I felt the panic rising within me, suffocating in the darkness. Just as I thought I was about to be discovered, Mia's voice rose again, filled with defiance. "If you want him, you'll have to go through me first." I could almost hear the deputy pause, weighing his options. The atmosphere shifted. It was no longer just a search, it had turned into a standoff. "Mia, don't." I wanted to scream, but I knew that if I did, it could jeopardize everything. My heart raced as I waited for the inevitable. "Get out of my apartment," she yelled, her voice unwavering. "You have no right to barge in here like this without a warrant. If you want to talk to Jake, you'll have to follow the law." Silence enveloped the room for a moment, the tension thick enough to slice through. I could hear their collective breaths, and I silently prayed that they wouldn't push her any further. Finally, Collins spoke, his voice low and threatening. "You're making a mistake, Mia. This is not just about Jake anymore. You're complicating things, and I don't want to see you get hurt." Mia stood her ground. "I'm not afraid of you, Sheriff. You think you're doing the right thing, but you're just stirring up a storm that's been brewing for years. You need to leave." In that moment of defiance, I felt a spark of hope ignite within me. Perhaps Mia was right. Perhaps we could stand up against the town's collective fear. But then, that hope was quickly snuffed out when I heard Collins bark a command. "Search the rest of the apartment. I want him found now." My heart raced as the footsteps moved again, this time toward the bedroom. I knew I had mere moments before they found me, before everything I had tried to escape would come crashing back. I had to act. With no time to think, I quietly pushed the closet door ajar just enough to peek outside. The sight of the deputies rummaging through Mia's belongings filled me with dread. I spotted Mia standing defiantly in the living room, her back to me, a wall of determination shielding me from the chaos. My instincts kicked in. I had to get out. If I stayed here, I would be caught, and the consequences would be dire. I nudged the closet door open a fraction more and slipped out, careful to remain unnoticed. I pressed my back against the wall, my breath shallow, and moved quietly toward the window at the far end of the room. I could hear the voices of the deputies growing louder, and my heart raced as I spotted a small fire escape just outside the window, a potential path to freedom. If I could reach it, I could escape the apartment and disappear into the shadows of the alley below. "Keep searching. He has to be here." Collins barked, frustration evident in his tone. The sound of rummaging intensified, and I took a deep breath, feeling the adrenaline surge through my veins. I edged closer to the window, my pulse quickening with every step. I could see the fire escape ladder hanging just outside, tantalizingly close yet out of reach. "Did you check the bathroom?" one of the deputies asked, and I froze. "Not yet, but I'll check it now," Collins replied, his footsteps echoing through the small apartment. Time was running out. I could feel it pressing down on me like a weight, and I knew I had to make my move. With a quick glance back at Mia, I saw the resolve in her eyes. She believed in me. I couldn't let her down. In one swift motion, I swung the window open, the cool air rushing in and filling my lungs with a sense of urgency. I climbed onto the ledge, heart racing, and swung my leg over the edge. The metal of the fire escape felt cold against my fingers as I steadied myself. Just as I began to descend, I heard a loud shout from inside the apartment. "Jake! He's gone!" Panic surged through me as I scrambled down the ladder, each rung feeling like an eternity. I could hear the deputies rushing out of the apartment, their footsteps echoing on the wooden floor. My heart thudded in my chest, the rush of escape mingling with fear. I reached the bottom of the ladder and dropped onto the ground, landing softly on the alley floor. I quickly scanned my surroundings, looking for a place to hide. The alley was narrow and dimly lit, lined with dumpsters and old crates, but it provided just enough cover. I heard the door to Mia's apartment burst open, followed by a flurry of voices. "Where did he go?" Collins shouted, his voice filled with rage. I pressed myself against the cold wall, my breath hitching in my throat as I listened to the chaos erupting above me. I couldn't stay here. They would be searching the streets next. I needed to move. Glancing around, I spotted a narrow path that led deeper into the shadows. I sprinted toward it, my heart pounding as adrenaline coursed through my veins. The shadows became my allies as I navigated the maze of alleyways, each turn taking me further away from the chaos that had enveloped my life. But as I turned the corner, I felt a chilling realization wash over me. I wasn't just running from the sheriff and his deputies, I was running from my past, from the memories that refused to stay buried. And no matter how far I went, I could feel those shadows following, lurking just beyond my sight. As I sprinted through the twisting alleys, the echoes of my past merged with the sound of my hurried footsteps. The town's familiar sights, dilapidated buildings, flickering streetlights, and old graffiti flashed by in a blur. My mind raced with questions. How could I make them believe I was innocent? Would I ever find a safe place again? I turned another corner and spotted a small, abandoned convenience store. Its windows were shattered, and the entrance was draped in shadows. It felt like the perfect hideout, a temporary refuge from the storm of accusations swirling around me. I slipped inside, the door creaking ominously as I pushed it open. The interior was a time capsule of neglect, dusty shelves lined with faded snacks and a counter layered with years of grime. I quickly moved deeper into the store, hiding behind the tall shelves filled with expired goods. From my vantage point, I could hear the faint sounds of sirens in the distance, growing louder as they closed in on the town. I crouched low, my heart racing, listening intently as footsteps approached outside. Split up. I heard Collins's voice bark. He can't have gotten far. Check every alleyway. Fear gripped me. I had to stay quiet, to remain hidden until the search faded. I leaned against the cool metal of the shelf, trying to steady my breathing. The silence around me was thick, but the outside world was a cacophony of shouts and sirens, each sound punctuating my growing anxiety. As the minutes passed, I felt the weight of my situation crash down on me. I was a fugitive in my own hometown, a town that had once felt like home but now seemed intent on devouring me whole. The memories of that night, the fire, the chaos, the faces of those who had turned against me, played on a loop in my mind. But as I sat there, trembling in the dark, something shifted. I realized I had to confront this fear, to understand what truly happened that night if I had any hope of clearing my name. I couldn't keep running from my past. Suddenly, a loud crash outside jolted me from my thoughts. I strained to listen as voices grew closer. Search the store. He might be hiding in there. Panic surged through me again. I had to act. I crept toward the back of the store, hoping to find another exit. As I moved, I caught sight of a broken window near the restroom, a potential escape route. Just then, I heard the front door swing open with a bang, followed by footsteps entering the store. He's not here. Search the back. Collins shouted. My heart raced as I realized time was running out. I sprinted toward the restroom, pushing through the door and skidding to a halt in front of the window. I quickly glanced back. There was no time to waste. I climbed up onto the sink, feeling the cool porcelain beneath my fingers, and pushed the window open with all my strength. The sounds of the deputies echoed behind me, and I could feel their presence closing in. With a swift motion, I hoisted myself through the window, my heart pounding as I dropped into the alley outside. I landed hard, the rough pavement biting into my palms, but I had no time to dwell on the pain. I glanced back at the store, now filled with shouts and movement. I needed to get away, to disappear into the night before they caught me. I took off down the alley, my feet pounding against the ground as I navigated the familiar but now foreign streets of my childhood. I headed toward the park, a place I used to escape to when life felt too heavy. The trees and shadows would provide cover, at least for a little while. But as I reached the park's entrance, a chilling thought gripped me. If I couldn't face the truth of my past, I would always be running. And I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep it up. The realization stung sharper than I anticipated. I had to confront what happened that night and the people who believed I was guilty. With every step, I steeled my resolve. I wouldn't run forever. I would find a way to prove my innocence, even if it meant stepping back into the very shadows I had fled. But first, I had to survive the night. The park loomed ahead, a dark expanse of trees and shadows that felt both comforting and intimidating. I slipped through the entrance, moving cautiously to avoid detection. The moonlight filtered through the branches, casting eerie shadows that danced along the ground. The familiar sights of my childhood, swing sets and old picnic tables, seemed like ghosts of a happier past. As I crept deeper into the park, I found a dense thicket of bushes that offered some cover. I crouched low, pulling my knees to my chest, and listened intently. The distant sounds of sirens echoed through the night, a grim reminder that my freedom was precarious. From my hidden vantage point, I could see a few officers patrolling the park, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I held my breath, hoping they wouldn't stumble upon my hiding spot. The longer I remained hidden, the more I realized I couldn't just wait for the storm to pass. I needed to take control of my fate. I pulled out my phone, the screen cracked but still functional. I needed to contact Mia to find out what she was doing and if she was safe. My fingers trembled as I typed out a message. I'm okay. In the park. What should I do? After hitting send, I waited, each second feeling like an eternity. My heart pounded in my chest, and I could feel the sweat trickling down my back. It was only a few minutes before my phone vibrated with a reply. Stay hidden. I'll come find you. Trust me. I wanted to respond, to tell her I didn't want to be a burden, but the moment I started to type, I heard a voice calling from just beyond the thicket. Jake, we know you're out there. Just come out. We can talk about this. It was Collins, his tone a mix of authority and something softer, almost pleading. I stifled a gasp, my instincts screaming at me to stay quiet. I could feel the ground beneath me as I pressed myself further into the brush. It was as if the earth itself was pulling me deeper, offering solace from the looming threat. Jake, you need to face this. Collins continued. Hiding won't make it go away. We can help you. Help? I scoffed silently. That word had lost all meaning to me. I felt betrayed by the very people who had sworn to protect the town, and I couldn't trust them now. Just then, a rustle in the bushes caught my attention. I turned to see Mia, her silhouette barely visible in the dim light. Relief washed over me, and I felt a surge of gratitude that she had come to find me. Jake, come on, she whispered urgently, glancing over her shoulder. We need to move before they find you. I emerged from my hiding place, my heart racing with a mix of fear and hope. What's happening? Are you okay? She nodded, but the worry in her eyes told a different story. I'm fine, but they're not giving up. We have to get out of here. Follow me. Without hesitating, I followed her through the park, weaving between trees and bushes. The adrenaline pumped through my veins as we moved swiftly, the fear of being caught propelling us forward. We reached the edge of the park, where the trees thinned out, revealing a deserted street. Mia led me toward an old bike path that wound through a dense section of woods, a shortcut to the outskirts of town. As we ran, I couldn't help but ask, what about the police? What do we do if they catch us? Mia slowed for a moment, catching her breath. We have to find evidence, something that proves you didn't do it. If we can show them the truth, maybe we can turn this around. Evidence? I echoed, the weight of her words sinking in. But what kind of evidence? It was all so long ago. Anything, she replied, determination sparking in her eyes. We need to retrace your steps, go back to the places where it happened. There's got to be something we missed. As we plunged deeper into the woods, the sounds of the town faded, replaced by the whispers of the wind through the trees. I felt a mix of dread and determination, knowing that the path ahead would lead me back to the very shadows I had been running from. But I was no longer the scared boy who had fled in the dead of night. I had someone by my side who believed in me, and together we would face whatever demons awaited us in the dark. The stakes had never been higher, but if I wanted to reclaim my life, I had to confront my past head-on. The moon hung high above us, casting a silver glow on our path as we ventured into the unknown. I could feel the echoes of my past trailing behind me, but this time I would not run. I would confront them and finally find a way to silence the haunting memories once and for all. The air in the woods was thick with tension, the shadows stretching long in the moonlight as Mia and I navigated the narrow path. Each rustle of leaves and snap of twigs underfoot amplified the fear pulsing in my veins, but it was more than just fear. It was a determination that had taken root in me. I couldn't keep running from my past. This was my chance to reclaim my life. We reached a small clearing, and I paused to catch my breath. Where do we even start? I asked, the weight of the question heavy in the silence between us. I don't remember much from that night other than chaos. Mia considered my words, her brow furrowed. We start where it all began. At the old warehouse by the river. That's where everything happened, right? I nodded slowly, the memories flooding back, flashes of sirens, shadows, and screams. Yeah, the warehouse. I could feel the bile rising in my throat at the thought of returning to that place. But what if they're still there? What if the deputies are looking for us? We'll be quick, she urged, her voice steady. If we can find anything that connects you to what really happened, it could turn everything around. We can't let fear hold us back. Her resolve ignited a spark in me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Okay, let's do it. As we moved deeper into the woods, the path gradually sloped down towards the river. The sound of the water flowing was calming, but the memories it stirred were anything but. I could already feel the weight of dread settling in my stomach. When we finally reached the riverbank, the warehouse loomed in the distance like a dark specter against the night sky. The structure was dilapidated, its windows boarded up, the door hanging askew. It felt like a graveyard for the memories I wanted to bury. Mia took my hand, squeezing it tightly. We can do this, she whispered, her eyes locking onto mine. I nodded, though my heart was a chaotic drumbeat in my chest. We approached the warehouse cautiously, each step deliberate as we crossed the threshold of the entrance. The air inside was musty and stale, the smell of decay heavy in our nostrils. I glanced around, taking in the remnants of a place once alive with activity, now reduced to an eerie silence. Let's split up and search for anything that could help us, Mia suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. If we find something, we can regroup and figure out our next move. Be careful, I replied, my heart heavy with concern. The last thing I wanted was for her to get caught or hurt. We parted ways, and I moved deeper into the shadows, trying to remember the layout of the warehouse. As I walked, the memories came flooding back, the arguments, the shouting, the chaos of that night. I felt the cold fingers of fear wrap around my throat, and I forced myself to focus on finding something, anything, that could change my fate. I reached a dimly lit corner where a few crates lay stacked haphazardly. I approached them, my hands trembling as I pulled one open. Inside, I found discarded items, old bottles, bits of trash, and remnants of a life that had once thrived here. My heart sank as I dug through the debris, the feeling of hopelessness creeping in. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted something glinting in the faint light, a small metal object half buried in the dirt. I crouched down, brushing away the grime, and uncovered a keychain. It was a broken piece of metal, engraved with a name I recognized all too well. My heart raced as I realized what it meant. It was evidence, a piece of the puzzle that linked me to that night. Jake. Mia's voice pierced through the silence, pulling me from my thoughts. I found something. I quickly pocketed the keychain and rushed toward her voice, my pulse quickening. I turned a corner and found her standing near the back wall of the warehouse, a faded photograph clutched in her hands. "Look at this," she said, her eyes wide with shock. "It's a picture from the night of the fire." I took the photograph from her, my breath catching in my throat. It showed a group of us, friends gathered at the warehouse, laughter frozen in time. But in the background, I noticed a shadowy figure lurking just outside the frame. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mia squinted at the image, her brow furrowing. "I don't know, but it looks suspicious. We need to find out who this is. If we can figure it out, it could help clear your name." I nodded, determination flooding back into my veins. We needed to find answers, and this photograph could be the key to unraveling the truth behind the tragedy that had turned my life upside down. But just as I began to feel a glimmer of hope, I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from outside. My heart dropped. They were coming. "Hide!" I hissed, shoving the photograph into my pocket as we ducked behind a stack of crates, pressing ourselves against the cold, hard surface. The sound of voices grew louder, and I could make out the familiar tones of the deputies. "Let's check this place again," Collins said. "He has to be here somewhere." Panic surged through me as I realized our time was running out. We had to find a way to escape without being caught. The shadows felt alive, and I could hear the rustling of uniforms approaching our hiding spot. "Stay quiet," I whispered to Mia, my heart pounding in my chest. We had to outsmart them, to stay hidden just a little longer. The stakes were higher than ever, and failure was not an option. The deputies' footsteps echoed ominously as they entered the warehouse, their flashlights slicing through the darkness like blades. I could feel my heart racing, each beat thrumming in my ears as I focused on controlling my breathing. I exchanged a quick glance with Mia, whose eyes were wide with fear but also determination. "Do you think they know we're here?" she whispered, barely moving her lips. I shook my head. "I don't know, but we can't stay here. We need to find another way out." The officers moved further into the warehouse, and I strained to hear their conversation, my pulse quickening as I caught snippets of their discussion. "This place is a mess," one of them said. "How can he be hiding in here?" "They'll slip up eventually." "Just keep searching," Collins replied, his voice steady and authoritative. The tension in the air felt suffocating, and I could almost feel the weight of their scrutiny, like a spotlight illuminating the dark corners of my mind. I had to focus. We needed a plan, and we needed it fast. As I scanned the dim interior for an escape route, I spotted a half-open door at the far end of the warehouse. It led to a narrow passage that seemed to disappear into darkness. "There," I whispered urgently to Mia, pointing towards the door. She nodded, her expression resolute. "On the count of 3, we go. 1, 2, 3. With that, We sprang from our hiding place, adrenaline propelling us forward. I sprinted toward the door, my heart racing as I glanced over my shoulder to see if the deputies had noticed us. They hadn't, yet. We dashed through the door and into the passageway, the darkness swallowing us whole as we pressed on. The sound of our footsteps echoed behind us, but I couldn't let fear take hold. We had to keep moving. The passage twisted and turned, the walls damp and cool against my skin. I could feel the weight of the photograph in my pocket, a reminder of what was at stake. We needed to uncover the truth, not just for my sake, but for the sake of everyone affected by that tragic night. As we reached the end of the passage, I pushed against a door, my fingers trembling as I turned the handle. It creaked open, revealing an old storage area filled with forgotten relics of the past, discarded furniture, boxes of old clothes, and remnants of lives that had once been intertwined in this space. "Is this another dead end?" Mia asked, peering around the dim room. "Maybe not," I replied, my mind racing. "Look for something we can use. There has to be a way out or something that can help us." We began to search frantically through the clutter, our movements hurried as we listened for the sound of approaching footsteps. I rifled through an old cardboard box, tossing aside broken toys and faded pictures. Just as I was about to give up, I spotted a small metal door tucked away in the corner. "Over here," I called to Mia, my excitement bubbling over. I hurried over to it, pulling on the rusted handle. It creaked ominously but didn't budge. "Do you need help?" Mia asked, rushing to my side. I nodded, and together we pulled on the handle with all our strength. With a loud screech, the door finally swung open, revealing a dark staircase leading down into the depths below. "Should we go down there?" Mia hesitated, glancing back toward the exit. "We don't have a choice," I replied, glancing at the faint light filtering through the doorway we had just come through. "They'll find us if we stay here." With a shared look of determination, we stepped into the darkness of the staircase, the door creaking shut behind us. The air grew colder as we descended, and the musty scent of mildew filled my lungs. I could feel Mia's hand gripping mine tightly, a silent promise that we would face whatever awaited us together. As we reached the bottom of the stairs, a faint light flickered in the distance. I squinted, trying to discern what lay ahead. The space opened up into a larger room, its walls lined with shelves filled with dusty jars and forgotten artifacts. "What is this place?" Mia whispered, her voice echoing softly. "I don't know, but it looks like it hasn't been touched in years." I took a cautious step forward, my eyes scanning the room for anything that could help us. Suddenly, a sharp noise echoed from behind us, a thud, followed by the sound of footsteps climbing down the stairs. Panic surged through me as I realized the deputies were close, their voices growing louder. "Did you hear that? They must have gone down," Collins shouted, urgency in his tone. "Mia, we have to hide." I hissed, grabbing her hand and pulling her behind a tall shelf filled with jars. We crouched low, our hearts pounding in sync as we listened to the deputies' footsteps approach. "They couldn't have gone far," one of the officers said. "Check the storage area first." I held my breath, feeling the walls closing in around us. The sound of footsteps drew closer, and I could hear the muffled voices discussing our potential whereabouts. "This is a waste of time." "He's just a kid," Collins argued. "We should be focusing on finding the evidence, not chasing shadows." A cold shiver ran down my spine at his words. It felt like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. I had become a shadow, an echo of someone I used to be, and now they were hunting me. "Let's check down here." It's our only option, another officer suggested, and I knew they were only moments away from discovering us. As I peeked out from behind the shelf, my mind raced with options. We couldn't stay hidden forever. We had to think of a way to escape and find the evidence that could prove my innocence. The stakes were too high, and time was running out. Mia, I whispered urgently, if we have to, we might have to create a distraction. We can't let them catch us here. Her eyes widened at the thought, but the determination in her gaze spoke volumes. Whatever it takes, she replied softly, her resolve mirroring my own. We were in this together, and I couldn't let fear dictate our fate. We had to confront our past and fight for our future, no matter the cost. As the deputies drew closer, the tension in the air thickened, wrapping around us like a noose. I could hear their voices merging into an indistinct murmur, punctuated by the sounds of their footsteps echoing off the cold concrete walls. My heart raced, each beat echoing the urgency of our situation. We had to act, and fast. Do you see anything we can use as a distraction? I whispered to Mia, my eyes scanning the dimly lit room. Maybe one of those jars, she suggested, nodding towards a shelf filled with dusty glass containers. If we throw something, it might make enough noise to draw them away. Good idea, I replied, my mind racing with possibilities. But we need to make sure it works. Cautiously, I reached for a large jar, its surface slick with dust. I lifted it carefully, feeling its weight in my hands. On the count of 3, we'll throw it toward the stairs. Ready? 1, 2, 3. With a swift motion, I hurled the jar as hard as I could. It sailed through the air, crashing against the wall near the staircase with a deafening shatter. The sound echoed through the room, and for a brief moment, there was silence. Mia, now! I hissed, grabbing her hand as we darted from our hiding spot. We raced deeper into the room, hoping to find another exit or at least some cover as the deputies turned their attention toward the noise. Did you hear that? One of the deputies shouted. Let's check it out. Their footsteps echoed off the stairs as they hurried toward the source of the sound. I glanced at Mia, whose eyes were wide with adrenaline and fear. This way, I urged, leading her toward a shadowy corner of the room. We ducked behind a stack of crates, our breathing shallow and quick as we listened to the deputies' voices fading into the distance. It worked, Mia whispered, relief flooding her voice. But we need to find a way out of here now. I nodded, scanning the area around us. The room was cluttered with old equipment and discarded items, but I noticed a faint light seeping from underneath a door on the opposite wall. There. I pointed, my heart racing with hope. That could be our way out. We crept toward the door, every footfall measured and silent. My hands trembled as I reached for the handle, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned it slowly, and the door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway illuminated by a flickering light bulb. Let's go, I urged, stepping into the passage. It felt like a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the overwhelming darkness. As we made our way down the corridor, the light flickered ominously overhead, casting long shadows that danced along the walls. The air grew colder, and an unsettling feeling gnawed at my gut. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed behind us, louder than before. They're coming back. Mia gasped, her eyes wide with fear. We need to move faster, I urged, picking up the pace. The passage twisted and turned, and I had no idea where it would lead us, but we couldn't turn back now. Just as we rounded a corner, the passage opened up into a larger room filled with old machinery and tools. In the center of the room stood a massive old generator, its metal casing rusty and worn. The sight of it sparked a memory, a fleeting thought of the night the fire had started, the generator buzzing ominously before everything went up in flames. "This place is a maze," Mia said, her voice trembling. "We can't keep running in circles." I scanned the room, desperately searching for an exit. "There must be another way out," I insisted, moving toward a set of double doors at the far end of the room. As we approached, the footsteps behind us grew louder, urgency spilling into their movements. "They're right behind us," I shouted, adrenaline surging through my veins. "We have to get through those doors." We reached the doors and pushed against them with all our strength, but they wouldn't budge. I could feel panic creeping in as I pulled harder. "Come on, open." With a final heave, the doors swung wide open, revealing a dimly lit alleyway. I grabbed Mia's hand, and we dashed outside, the cool night air hitting us like a wave of freedom. "Where now?" Mia panted, glancing around wildly as we stumbled into the alley. "Anywhere but here," I replied, looking for a place to hide. The street was empty, but I could hear the faint sounds of sirens in the distance, getting closer. "Let's head towards the park. It might be safer there." We sprinted down the alley, the sounds of our pursuers fading behind us. As we reached the park, I felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety wash over me. The moonlight bathed the area in silver, illuminating the paths and trees, but it also felt eerily quiet, too quiet. "Do you think we lost them?" Mia asked, glancing back nervously. "I hope so," I said, trying to catch my breath. "But we can't stop. We need to find a place to hide until we figure out our next move." We ducked behind a large oak tree, the gnarled roots providing us with some cover. My mind raced, trying to process everything that had just happened. The photograph, the chase, the fear, it all seemed like a surreal nightmare. "Jake, what if they catch us?" Mia's voice trembled, and I could see the fear etched on her face. "They won't," I reassured her, though doubt lingered in my mind. "We're going to figure this out. We just need to stay calm and think clearly." As we crouched behind the tree, the distant sound of sirens grew louder, reverberating in the still night air. I could feel the weight of impending doom hanging over us, and the reality of our situation settled in. This wasn't just a game of cat and mouse. Our lives were at stake. Suddenly, a movement in the shadows caught my eye. A figure emerged from the darkness, and my heart raced as I prepared to defend myself. But as the figure stepped into the moonlight, I recognized a familiar face. "Jake?" The voice was soft but urgent. "Is that you?" My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the unexpected visitor. It was Alex, my old friend from high school, the one person who knew the truth about that night. "What are you doing here?" I gasped, relief flooding over me. "I came to find you," he said, glancing around nervously. "I heard what happened. They think you're a criminal, but I know you didn't do it. We need to get you out of here." Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed nearby, jolting me back to the reality of our precarious situation. "We don't have much time," I said urgently, my heart pounding. "The deputies are looking for us." "Follow me," Alex urged, his eyes darting around the park. "I know a way out." With no time to waste, I took Mia's hand, and we followed Alex through the darkened paths of the park. The night was alive with sounds, the rustling of leaves, distant voices, and the faint whir of sirens, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt a flicker of hope. We reached a small gate at the edge of the park, the moonlight illuminating our escape route. As we slipped through the gate, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders, but I was determined to uncover the truth behind the past that had haunted me for so long. "Where do we go now?" Mia asked, her voice a mix of fear and hope. "To the old diner," Alex replied, glancing back nervously. "It's the one place we can talk safely, away from prying eyes." As we made our way through the quiet streets, the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a deep sense of exhaustion. But there was no time for rest. I had to find a way to clear my name, to confront the shadows of my past once and for all. When we finally reached the diner, I felt a surge of familiarity wash over me. This was a place filled with memories, both good and bad. But now, it was our sanctuary, a refuge where we could plan our next move. "Let's go inside," I said, pushing open the door. The familiar jingle of the bell overhead felt like a small comfort in the midst of chaos. Inside, the diner was empty except for a few late-night patrons scattered in booths. The dim lights cast a warm glow, a stark contrast to the chill of the night outside. I led Mia and Alex to a booth in the back, our conversation hushed but urgent. "Jake, I'm so glad you're safe," Alex said, leaning in. "But we need to figure out what to do next. The longer you're out here, the more trouble you're in." "I know," I replied, running a hand through my hair in frustration. "I can't believe they think I'm a criminal. We have to find the evidence that proves I didn't do it." "Right," Mia chimed in. "And that photograph you found, it could be the key. We need to find out who that shadowy figure is. They're the one who knows what really happened." My mind raced as I remembered the photograph, the figure looming in the background, a haunting reminder of the night that changed everything. But how do we find them? I asked, the weight of uncertainty hanging over us. "We have to retrace your steps," Alex suggested. "Go back to the warehouse and see if there's anything we missed. Maybe there are more clues there." I hesitated, the thought of returning to the place of my nightmares sending a shiver down my spine. But I knew we had to face it if we wanted to uncover the truth. "Okay, let's do it," I said, determination solidifying within me. "But we have to be careful. They're going to be looking for us." As we made our plans, I felt a sense of urgency building within me. We had to uncover the truth before it was too late. The shadows of my past were closing in, and I wouldn't let them consume me. I had to confront my fears, face the unknown, and reclaim my life once and for all. The night was far from over, and as we stepped out of the diner, the weight of what lay ahead pressed heavily on my shoulders. But with Mia and Alex by my side, I felt a renewed sense of strength. Together, we would fight against the darkness that threatened to engulf us. The journey back to the warehouse was fraught with tension. Every shadow seemed to stretch ominously, every sound echoed like a whisper of danger. I could feel the adrenaline coursing through my veins, my heart pounding in sync with the rhythm of our footsteps on the pavement. "Do you think they'll be waiting for us?" Mia asked, her voice barely above a whisper as we approached the looming structure of the warehouse. "Maybe," I replied, trying to sound confident. "But we'll be ready. We know the layout better than they do." As we reached the entrance, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. The memories of that night flooded back, fear, confusion, and the gut-wrenching realization that I might not make it out alive. But this time, I wasn't alone. I had Mia and Alex by my side. Pushing the door open, the familiar creak echoed in the empty space. Dust motes danced in the beams of moonlight filtering through the broken windows. The air was thick with the smell of oil and decay, remnants of a past that haunted me. "Stay close," I warned as we stepped inside. The shadows loomed larger, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. We moved cautiously through the warehouse, my heart racing with every creak of the floorboards. I led the way to the back room, the place where I had discovered the photograph, hoping it would offer more answers this time. "Let's check the area where you found the picture," Alex suggested, his eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. "Right," I nodded, feeling the weight of our mission pressing down on me. I knelt down to search the floor, hoping to uncover something, anything, that would help us piece together the mystery. As I rummaged through the debris, Mia's voice broke the silence. "Jake, look at this." She pointed to a torn piece of fabric snagged on a jagged edge of wood. I leaned closer, recognizing the fabric as part of a coat, a dark, heavy material that matched the shadowy figure in the photograph. "This could be important," I said, carefully pulling it free. "It's evidence that someone was here." "Do you think it belongs to that figure?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with intrigue. "Possibly," I replied, stuffing the fabric into my pocket. "If we can find out who it belongs to, it might lead us to the truth." Just then, a noise echoed from the entrance of the warehouse, a sharp clang followed by footsteps. My heart dropped as I turned to Mia and Alex. "We need to hide, now." We scrambled behind a stack of crates, our breaths held tight as we listened intently. The footsteps grew louder, accompanied by low voices. I felt the fear rising in my throat, panic threatening to spill over. "Did you hear something?" one of the deputies called out. "Check that room." I could feel Mia trembling beside me, and I placed a reassuring hand on her arm. "Stay quiet," I whispered, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. The footsteps approached our hiding place, and I could see the shadow of a deputy moving closer. My heart raced as the door swung open, the beam of a flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Over here," the deputy shouted, and my stomach dropped. They had found us. "We have to move," I hissed, grabbing Mia's hand. We darted out from behind the crates, running as fast as we could toward the back of the warehouse. I could hear the deputies calling out, their footsteps pounding behind us. "Jake, where do we go?" Mia shouted, fear lacing her voice. "Keep going," I urged, scanning the room for an escape route. "We'll find a way out." We bolted past the machinery, the shadows closing in around us. My mind raced, and I spotted a small window near the back wall. It was our only chance. "There!" I shouted, pointing. "We can get through that window." With a surge of adrenaline, I lunged toward it, pulling Mia along with me. I reached the window and quickly pushed it open, the rusted metal groaning in protest. "Help me!" I yelled to Alex, who was right behind us. He grasped my arm and together we pulled Mia through the window, just as the deputies rounded the corner, shouts echoing in the air. I barely made it through, my body scraping against the sharp edges of the frame. "Go, go!" I urged, pushing Mia forward as we landed in a heap on the ground outside. We scrambled to our feet, adrenaline flooding my veins as we took off into the night, running away from the warehouse and the threat it held. The cool night air filled my lungs, but there was no time to rest. We had to keep moving. "Which way?" Mia gasped, looking around wildly. "Follow me," I urged, taking the lead as we dashed down a narrow alley, the sounds of pursuit still echoing behind us. The streetlights flickered overhead, casting long shadows that danced around us as we ran. As we turned a corner, I spotted a small park ahead. "In there," I pointed, feeling a glimmer of hope. "We can hide in the trees." We dashed into the park, the darkness swallowing us whole. I led the way into a cluster of bushes, our breaths coming in quick gasps as we crouched low, trying to remain silent. "I can't believe we made it," Mia whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and relief. "For now," I replied, trying to keep my own fear at bay. "But we need a plan. They won't stop searching for us." I glanced at Alex, who was catching his breath. "What do we do next?" I asked, my mind racing. "We need to figure out who that figure in the photo is and what they wanted." "We could try to find out more about the warehouse," Alex suggested. "There might be records or something that could give us a lead." "That's a good idea," I said, nodding. "But we have to be careful. If they're looking for us, they'll be watching everywhere." Mia glanced at the park entrance, her expression anxious. "And we can't stay here too long. What if they come here next?" "Right," I agreed, feeling the pressure of time pressing down on us. "We need to split up to gather information, but let's stay in contact. I'll check the library for any records related to the warehouse while you two look for more clues around town." "Okay," Alex replied, determination flashing in his eyes. "We can meet back here in a couple of hours." As we made our plans, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were walking a tightrope, balancing on the edge of danger. But I was willing to face whatever came our way. I had to uncover the truth and clear my name, no matter the cost. When the time came to part ways, I felt a knot of anxiety in my stomach. "Be careful," I warned, looking at Mia and Alex. "Don't take any unnecessary risks." "You too," Mia said, her eyes shining with resolve. As they turned to leave, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what lay ahead. Alone in the dark park, I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. But I was determined to confront my past and face the shadows that lurked just out of sight. With one last look at the direction Mia and Alex had gone, I headed toward the library, my heart racing with a mix of fear and hope. The truth was out there, waiting to be uncovered, and I would stop at nothing to find it. The library loomed ahead, its facade an imposing structure of brick and ivy that felt both familiar and foreign. As I approached the entrance, the fluorescent lights flickered to life, casting a sterile glow that felt unwelcoming. I pushed through the heavy wooden doors, the familiar scent of old books enveloping me, and stepped into the hushed atmosphere. I moved quickly to the back where the local history section was housed. My mind raced as I sifted through the rows of dusty books, each one a portal to a past I was desperate to understand. I needed to find anything related to the warehouse, its history, its owners, any events that might have taken place within its walls. As I scanned the shelves, I stumbled upon a large tome titled The History of Our Town, Secrets and Shadows. My heart raced as I pulled it from the shelf, the cover worn and cracked with age. I flipped through the pages, absorbing the details about the town's past, the people who lived here, and the events that shaped its history. "Please let there be something," I whispered to myself, desperation clawing at my insides. I found references to the warehouse, a hub for industrial activity decades ago, but there were also whispers of darker events. Tales of disappearances, strange occurrences, and rumors of a secret society that operated within its confines. As I read, a sense of dread settled over me. The stories hinted at something sinister lurking beneath the surface. I felt as if I were unearthing a hidden truth that could change everything. Just then, I heard footsteps approaching. My heart raced, and I quickly shoved the book into my bag, not wanting to attract attention. I glanced around, trying to blend in with the shadows as I peered around the bookshelf. A figure in a dark coat strolled through the aisles, their gaze scanning the room, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Was it a coincidence, or was this person searching for me? I took a step back, my pulse quickening as they drew closer. I ducked behind another shelf, holding my breath as they passed. My mind was racing. Who were they? Did they know what I was looking for? The tension in the air was palpable, and I fought the urge to flee. Instead, I decided to stay hidden and observe. After a few moments, the figure continued deeper into the library, seemingly oblivious to my presence. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety wash over me. I needed to move quickly before they returned. I left my hiding spot and made my way toward the exit, my bag heavy with the book. As I stepped outside, I glanced around, ensuring there were no eyes on me. I needed to regroup with Mia and Alex and share what I had discovered. As I walked toward the park, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. The shadows felt longer, and the air grew thicker with tension. Every rustle of leaves or distant sound set my nerves on edge. When I reached the park, I spotted Mia and Alex waiting near the same bushes where we had hidden earlier. They looked relieved to see me, and I rushed over to them. "Did you find anything?" Mia asked, her eyes wide with curiosity and concern. "Yes," I replied, my voice low. "I discovered some disturbing history about the warehouse. It's tied to disappearances and rumors of a secret society. We need to be cautious." "Secret society?" Alex echoed, frowning. "What do you mean?" I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my words. "There are stories about people who went missing, connected to the warehouse. It seems there's more to it than we realized." Mia's expression hardened. "Do you think it's connected to the figure in the photo?" "It has to be," I replied. "We need to dig deeper, but we also need to be careful." I had a strange encounter in the library with someone who seemed like they were searching for me. "Great," Alex muttered, his brows furrowing. "We can't let our guard down. They could be onto us." "Right," I agreed. "We need to figure out our next steps. Maybe we can find someone in town who knows more about the warehouse or this society." Mia nodded, determination setting in her gaze. "Let's ask around. We can start with some of the older folks in town. They might remember things we don't." As we discussed our plan, I felt the weight of the impending danger looming over us. The clock was ticking, and I could sense that time was running out. We had to act fast before the shadows of my past closed in on us completely. "Let's split up again," I suggested. "We can cover more ground this way. We'll meet back here in a couple of hours." With that, we set off in different directions, the park fading behind me as I ventured into the heart of the town. I felt a sense of urgency pushing me forward, knowing that each moment counted. The truth was waiting for us, buried beneath layers of fear and secrecy. As I walked, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me, shadows flitting just beyond my periphery. I pushed the fear aside, focusing on finding answers. I would confront my past and face whatever awaited me. The evening wore on, the sky darkening above, and I made my way toward the small diner at the edge of town. It was a gathering spot for locals, a place where stories flowed as freely as the coffee. If anyone had information, it would be here. As I entered the diner, the warm light was a stark contrast to the chill in the air. I took a seat at the counter, my heart racing as I scanned the room. The familiar faces of townsfolk were gathered, but one in particular caught my eye, a grizzled old man hunched over a cup of coffee, his weathered face lined with secrets. "Excuse me," I said, approaching him cautiously. "Can I ask you a few questions about the warehouse?" He looked up, his gaze sharp and piercing. The warehouse? What do you want to know? I hesitated, sensing the weight of his words. I've heard stories about it, strange occurrences, disappearances. Do you know anything about that? The old man's expression shifted, a shadow crossing his features. I know more than most, he said slowly. But be warned, boy. Some truths are best left buried. I felt a chill run down my spine as he leaned in closer, lowering his voice. You're not the first to poke around those shadows. People have gone missing for less. Please, I urged, desperation creeping into my voice. I need to know what happened. I have to find the truth. He studied me for a moment, and I could see the gears turning in his mind. All right, but you need to be careful. There are eyes everywhere, and the past has a way of catching up with those who dig too deep. His words hung in the air, and I felt the gravity of the situation. I had no choice but to plunge into the depths of the past, no matter the consequences. Tell me what you know, I said, determination flooding my veins. He glanced around, ensuring no one was listening before he leaned closer. The warehouse was once a place of power, a hub for those who sought to control what others didn't understand. They dealt in shadows and secrets, and those who crossed them rarely returned. As he spoke, I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. The truth was darker than I had imagined, and the stakes were higher than ever. I was about to embark on a path that could lead to my undoing. What happened to those who disappeared? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The old man's gaze hardened. They say they were taken by the very darkness that surrounds that place. You must tread carefully, boy. The shadows are alive, and they're watching. Just then, the door to the diner swung open, and a gust of wind swept through the room. My heart sank as I saw the figure step inside, dark coat, hood pulled low. It was the same person I had seen in the library. Get out of here, the old man hissed, urgency lacing his voice. Now! Without a second thought, I turned and bolted for the door, fear igniting every nerve in my body. I burst out into the night, adrenaline surging as I raced toward the park, my mind racing with questions and dread. I needed to find Mia and Alex. I needed to warn them that the shadows were closing in, and there was no telling what might happen next. As I sprinted through the park, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist around me, wrapping tighter with each hurried step. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, a frantic drumbeat echoing the fear coursing through my veins. I had to get to Mia and Alex before it was too late. The moon on high above, casting a pale light on the path ahead. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see the figure from the diner trailing behind me, but the night was still. The silence was deafening, a stark contrast to the chaos inside my mind. When I reached the meeting spot, I skidded to a stop, breathless and trembling. Mia and Alex were already there, their faces etched with concern. They stood by the same bushes, the shadows creeping around them like a dark veil. Where were you? Mia exclaimed, her eyes wide with worry. You took too long. I know, I panted, my voice shaky. I ran into trouble at the diner. The old man warned me about the shadows, and then that figure walked in. I think they're onto us. Alex's expression turned grave. What do you mean? Who was it? I don't know, I replied, my pulse racing. But the old man said people who poke around the warehouse go missing. We need to be careful. This isn't just some ghost story. It's real. Mia exchanged a worried glance with Alex. What do we do now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my racing heart. We have to regroup and figure out our next move. There's something sinister connected to that warehouse, and I have a feeling we're closer to the truth than we realize. We huddled closer, forming a tight circle as the cool night air pressed in around us. The tension was palpable, and I could feel the weight of our predicament bearing down on us. "Let's go back to the library," Alex suggested. "Maybe there's more information we can dig up, something that connects all of this." I nodded in agreement, grateful for their support. Yes, we need to find out what happened to those who went missing. There must be records or something that could shed light on this. As we began to make our way back, a rustle in the bushes caught my attention. I froze, instinctively reaching for Mia's arm. "Did you hear that?" Mia nodded, her eyes wide with fear. "It could be the figure. They might be following us." Alex squinted into the darkness, his jaw set in determination. "We can't let fear control us. We need to stay focused. Let's keep moving." With adrenaline pumping through my veins, we picked up the pace, moving cautiously but determinedly toward the library. The streets felt empty, almost too quiet, as if the entire town was holding its breath. Each shadow seemed to twist, each sound amplified in the stillness. When we arrived at the library, we slipped inside, the heavy door creaking ominously as it shut behind us. The fluorescent lights buzzed softly, casting an eerie glow over the rows of books. "Stay close," I whispered as we ventured deeper into the stacks. The atmosphere felt thick with secrets, the air heavy with unspoken histories. We headed straight for the local history section, where I had found the book earlier. Once we reached the shelves, I quickly pulled out the large tome again. "Let's see what else we can find," I urged, flipping through the pages. "There has to be something here that connects to the disappearances." As I scanned the pages, I noticed a section marked Local Legends and Folklore. My curiosity piqued. I began reading aloud. "Some say that the warehouse was built on cursed land, a place where dark rituals took place long before our time. It was said that those who disturbed the earth would awaken ancient forces." I glanced up at Mia and Alex, their expressions a mix of intrigue and apprehension. Could this be what the old man was talking about? Mia asked. "Possibly," I replied, my heart racing as I continued reading. There are mentions of strange occurrences, people hearing whispers at night, shadows moving without a source. It all ties back to the warehouse. As I read on, I stumbled upon a passage that sent a chill down my spine. Several families reported their loved ones vanishing after visiting the warehouse, never to be seen again. Some believed they were taken by the shadows that dwell there, drawn into the darkness. The gravity of the words settled over us like a fog. "We have to confront this," Alex said firmly, determination lighting his eyes. "If we can find out what really happened, maybe we can stop it from happening again." I nodded, feeling a surge of resolve. We need to go back to the warehouse. We can't let fear paralyze us. We have to face whatever is waiting for us there. "Are you sure?" Mia asked, uncertainty creeping into her voice. "What if we're walking into a trap?" I looked into her eyes, searching for the strength I knew we all needed. "We won't know until we try. We have to do this together." With a shared nod, we gathered our resolve. As we left the library, the cool night air greeted us once more. The path to the warehouse lay ahead, and with every step, I felt the weight of our past drawing closer. As we approached the warehouse, I noticed a looming structure casting long shadows under the moonlight. The place felt alive, almost sentient, as if it were waiting for us to make a move. "This is it," I said, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing my stomach. Stay close and keep your eyes peeled. With that, we stepped forward, the door creaking ominously as we entered the dimly lit interior. The air was stale and thick, a palpable reminder of the time that had passed since the warehouse had been used. Inside, the space was filled with remnants of machinery and old crates, the shadows dancing along the walls as we moved cautiously. We need to find anything that might give us a clue, I urged, glancing around at the disarray. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the building, causing us to jump. What was that? Mia whispered, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know, I replied, my heart racing. But we should check it out. As we moved deeper into the warehouse, I felt the air grow colder, a chill that seeped into my bones. The shadows twisted and contorted, creating shapes that seemed to reach for us. I fought the rising panic, focusing on the task at hand. We reached a large room filled with old equipment and crates stacked high against the walls. In the far corner, I saw something glinting, a metal box partially buried beneath a pile of debris. Over there. I pointed, urgency surging through me. We rushed toward the box, clearing away the rubble. As I pried it open, I was met with a collection of old photographs, papers, and a small journal. My hands trembled as I sifted through the contents, my heart racing with anticipation. This might be what we're looking for, I said, pulling out a faded photograph. It was an image of the warehouse from years ago, bustling with activity. But as I turned it over, my blood ran cold. Written on the back was a name I recognized all too well, my own. What the hell? Alex breathed, leaning over my shoulder. That's you? I nodded, confusion flooding my mind. But how? I've never been here before. Mia's voice quivered as she spoke. This doesn't make sense. How could you be in a photo from years ago? I don't know. I snapped, panic rising within me. But this means there's a connection, a thread that ties us all to this place. Suddenly, the warehouse groaned, the walls seeming to shudder as if reacting to my revelation. The shadows grew darker, swirling around us, and I could hear whispers creeping into my mind, an unintelligible murmur that filled the air with dread. We need to leave, Mia urged, her eyes wide with fear. Now! I nodded, shoving the photograph and the journal into my bag. Let's go! As we turned to run, the door slammed shut with a deafening bang, sealing us inside. The shadows deepened, and I felt an icy grip of terror clutching at my heart. We were trapped, and the darkness was closing in fast. What do we do? Alex shouted, panic rising in his voice. We fight. I yelled back, adrenaline surging as I scanned the room for an escape. The whispers grew louder, taunting us, filling the air with a sense of impending doom. Just then, the lights flickered and went out, plunging us into darkness. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, sending a shiver down my spine. We have to find a way out. I shouted, my voice echoing in the void. Stick together. We stumbled through the darkness, disoriented and frightened. The whispers morphed into anguished cries, each sound echoing the pain and terror of those who had come before us. Over here! Mia shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. She pointed toward a faint glimmer of light near the back of the room. We rushed toward it, our footsteps echoing against the concrete floor. Just as we reached the source of the light, I felt a sudden rush of cold air behind us, and the shadows converged. Run! I screamed, pushing Mia and Alex ahead of me as I felt the darkness claw at my back. We barreled toward the light, adrenaline fueling our escape. As we reached the edge of the beam, I glanced back to see the shadows twisting and writhing, a dark mass swirling with a life of its own. With one final push, we broke through the light, bursting into a small hallway that led to an emergency exit. I threw open the door, the metal creaking in protest, and we tumbled out into the cool night air. Gasping for breath, we staggered away from the warehouse, the weight of what had just happened pressing heavily upon us. What was that? Alex panted, his face pale with shock. I don't know, I replied, still shaking from the encounter. But we need to figure it out before it's too late. As we stood there, the reality of the situation settled in. The shadows weren't just a figment of our imagination, they were real, and they were watching us. We have to find a way to confront whatever is lurking in the darkness, I said, my voice steadying with resolve. We can't let it win. Not now. Mia nodded, determination shining in her eyes. We'll find a way to end this. Together. As we walked away from the warehouse, I felt a sense of urgency building within me. The shadows were far from defeated, but we had taken the first step toward uncovering the truth. And I knew, without a doubt, that we were only beginning to unravel the mysteries hidden within the shadows. The Night Visitor. Have you ever felt like you weren't alone in your own home? I hadn't, not until that night, a night that would forever carve a place in my mind, like a scar I could never hide. I live alone in a small, one-bedroom house in a quiet town on the outskirts of Indianapolis. It's the kind of place where you can hear the train whistle miles away, where neighbors rarely see one another, especially in the colder months when the chill keeps us all inside. That's what I love most about it, the solitude. Or at least, I used to love it. It was a Thursday night in late November. The first hints of winter were pressing against my window panes, whispering in cold breaths that seeped through every crack. I'd been reading in bed, my bedroom softly lit by a small lamp. Outside, the wind howled gently through the trees, a comforting sound that usually lulled me to sleep. But that night, something was different. As the clock struck midnight, I felt a sudden weight press upon my chest. At first, I thought it was just the late hour, the stillness of the night amplifying my thoughts. But then, the strange feeling grew, a nagging sense that someone was watching me. I glanced around my room, trying to shake the unsettling thought. Nothing appeared out of place, the shadows remained still, the door closed, and the silence unbroken. And then I heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible knock. It was soft, like someone gently tapping their nails against the wooden door. My heart stilled, a chill creeping up my spine. I tried to rationalize it. Perhaps a tree branch, swayed by the wind, had brushed against the side of the house. But it sounded closer, as though it came from just outside my bedroom door. I held my breath, waiting, listening. The knock came again, louder this time, persistent. It was unmistakable now. Someone was on the other side of that door, and they wanted in. I lay frozen under the covers, my heart pounding so loudly I wondered if it might echo through the walls. My mind raced, grasping for a logical explanation, anything that might keep the terrifying alternative at bay. Perhaps one of my neighbors needed help, though I hadn't spoken to any of them in weeks. But who had come to my house at this hour? And why knock so softly, almost as if they wanted to be unnoticed? Summoning all the courage I could muster, I slowly pushed the covers aside and stepped out of bed. My bare feet touched the cold hardwood floor, sending a shiver through me. I reached for the handle, pausing, my hand trembling. Every fiber of my being screamed for me to turn back, to retreat to the safety of my bed and ignore whatever was lurking outside. But curiosity, that dangerous itch, urged me forward. I twisted the doorknob slowly, making sure it wouldn't creak. As the door opened a sliver, I peered into the darkness of the hallway. Nothing. Just the familiar shadowed outline of the small hallway leading to the living room and kitchen beyond. I felt a wave of relief wash over me, a laugh bubbling up in my throat at my own paranoia. There was no one there, of course, there was no one there. But then, as I took a cautious step forward, I saw it, movement, right there, at the edge of my vision. It was faint, just a hint of something shifting in the shadows. I turned quickly, my eyes straining in the dim light, and caught a glimpse of what I can only describe as a figure, a tall, slender silhouette, too dark to make out any details. I blinked, and it was gone. My skin prickled with fear. I could still feel its presence, lingering in the darkness as if it had left some unseen residue behind. I stepped back, closing the door quickly, my mind racing. It was late, I was tired, and surely, I was just seeing things. But then the knocking started again, this time louder, insistent. Not from the hallway, but from the window. My bedroom has one window that looks out over the small garden in my backyard. The only light out there came from the distant street lamp at the end of the yard, barely enough to make out shapes. I didn't want to go to the window, but it was as if some invisible force was drawing me, compelling me to look. I walked toward it, my heart hammering with each step. The closer I got, the louder the knocking became, a rhythmic tapping that grew more and more erratic. I felt as if my own pulse had synchronized with that horrible sound. When I finally reached the window, I forced myself to look out. And that's when I saw it, clear as day, despite the darkness. A face staring back at me. It was pressed against the glass, the outline blurred, but the eyes, they were unmistakable. Dark, deep, bottomless pits that seemed to suck the light from the room. They locked onto mine, and I was paralyzed, unable to look away. In that brief, agonizing moment, time seemed to stop. My mind was screaming at me to run, to hide, to do anything to escape its gaze, but my body refused to listen. I was rooted to the spot, my breath caught in my throat, my entire world reduced to that face staring back at me. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. 1 second, those eyes were drilling into me, filling me with a terror I'd never known. The next, they vanished, leaving only the cold glass and the empty darkness beyond. I staggered back, clutching my chest, my legs trembling so badly I thought I might collapse. The room was silent again, but the memory of those eyes lingered, etched into my mind. I wanted to believe it was a hallucination, a trick of the light, but deep down, I knew better. Something was here. Something was watching me, and it wasn't finished. I backed away from the window, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave, to get out of the house. But where would I go? I was alone, with no nearby friends or family to call. Running outside in the dead of night felt equally terrifying, as if whatever it was outside might be waiting for me in the shadows. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand and opened the camera app, aiming it at the window as I crept closer again. I took a few pictures, my hand shaking so badly that the images blurred, but I couldn't bring myself to look at them just yet. If I'd captured even a hint of what I thought I'd seen, I knew I'd never sleep again. Just as I lowered my phone, a sound broke the silence, a quiet whisper that seemed to drift through the window. It was faint, muffled, and strangely melodic, like a lullaby sung from far, far away. I strained to hear, my mind struggling to make sense of it. The voice was soft, almost tender, but there was something wrong, something deeply unsettling in its tone. The words were just on the edge of recognition, slipping away before I could grasp them. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Silence. The house seemed to breathe around me, the old wood creaking in the dark. I could feel a presence in the room, hovering just beyond my sight, filling the air with a cold, heavy pressure. I was terrified to look, afraid of what I might see if I turned around. But then, from behind me, I heard a faint, raspy breath. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest as the breath grew louder, closer. It wasn't just the sound of someone breathing, it was labored, wet, as though whoever, or whatever, was struggling, each breath a painful effort. I turned around slowly, my eyes darting to every corner of the room. There was no one there. But the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, was overwhelming. I could feel it, its gaze heavy and dark, pressing down on me like a weight. My skin prickled with fear, my every instinct screaming that something unnatural was here, something I couldn't see but could definitely feel. Suddenly, I heard the voice again, closer this time, a whisper so soft it seemed to come from inside my own mind. "Come closer." My blood ran cold. The voice was female, delicate, almost familiar, yet laced with an otherworldly undertone that sent a shiver down my spine. It was as though the words were caressing me, pulling me, urging me forward despite the terror gripping my heart. I took an unsteady step back, but my body felt like it was moving against my will. That voice, it was digging into my mind, pushing me to follow, to obey, to surrender. I clenched my fists, fighting the pull, but every fiber of my being felt drawn to it, like I was caught in some invisible current, drifting helplessly toward the source of the voice. I stumbled to the corner of the room, my back pressed against the wall, as if it might somehow protect me. But the voice grew louder, filling my head, drowning out my thoughts until it was the only thing I could hear. My vision blurred, and I felt a strange sense of weightlessness, as if I were drifting in and out of reality. In that moment, I realized it wasn't just my home that was under attack, it was my mind. This thing, whatever it was, wasn't here to harm my body. It was here for my thoughts, my sanity, my very sense of self. I closed my eyes, trying to block out the voice, to silence the relentless pull it had on me. But as I stood there, gripping the wall, the whisper changed, becoming lower, darker, as though it had transformed into a new creature altogether. "Let me in." My body went cold, a sensation of icy fingers wrapping around my heart. I forced my eyes open, gasping as I looked back at the window. There, on the glass, was a handprint. It was dark, almost black, as though it had been burned into the surface. The fingers were long, unnaturally so, with jagged edges that looked more like claws than anything human. I stared at it, horrified, realizing that whatever had been watching me wasn't just in my head, it had been right here, inches from me. And it wanted to come inside. I felt trapped, like prey caught in a hunter's snare, my mind racing as I stared at the horrific handprint on the glass. It pulsed with a dark energy, as if the mark itself was alive, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw it twitch, the fingers curling ever so slightly. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the edge of my bed, my heart thundering in my chest. The whisper continued, soft and insistent, weaving through the air around me. It was closer now, whispering just beyond the threshold of understanding, the words slipping past my mind like smoke I couldn't grasp. I clenched my fists, trying to keep my sanity tethered as that insidious voice drilled deeper into my thoughts. In desperation, I grabbed my phone again and tried to call someone, anyone. The screen flickered, glitching strangely, as if the device was being affected by the presence in the room. I watched in horror as the screen blinked off and on, before finally going completely dark. My only connection to the outside world had just been severed. Panic surged through me. I had never felt so utterly isolated. I wanted to scream, to call for help, but a chilling realization washed over me. If I made a sound, if I acknowledged this thing, I might somehow invite it in, giving it even more control over me. A new fear twisted in my chest, a primal, suffocating dread that seemed to paralyze me. I backed into the far corner of the room, pressing my body against the wall, as if I could somehow merge with it and disappear. Every shadow in the room felt alive, twisting and stretching, as if they were reaching out to touch me, to pull me toward them. The darkness seemed to pulse, a thick, oppressive force that made the air heavy and hard to breathe. It was as if the very walls around me were closing in, sealing me in with this unseen entity. And then, in the thick silence, I heard it again. "Let me in." The voice was clearer now, almost inside my own head, echoing in the corners of my mind. It wasn't pleading, it was commanding. The force behind those words was so powerful, so suffused with malice, that it felt as if something was clawing its way into my thoughts, scraping and tearing at my sense of self. I clutched my head, trying to push the voice out, but it only grew louder, filling every corner of my mind until it drowned out everything else. In a moment of pure desperation, I whispered, "Why are you here? What do you want from me?" The silence that followed was crushing, pressing in on me from all sides. For a moment, I thought I might have broken free, that my words had somehow banished whatever had invaded my home. But then, the voice replied, low and guttural, more terrifying than anything I had ever heard. "You invited me." I gasped, my mind reeling. Invited it? How? When? I racked my brain, searching for any memory, any event that might have led to this, but nothing made sense. I had never invited anything like this into my life. I was careful, cautious, a skeptic of all things paranormal. Yet here it was, this entity claiming I had somehow brought it into my world. Before I could even begin to process this revelation, the voice shifted, becoming softer, almost gentle, yet laced with a venomous edge. "I've been waiting, watching. You've been so lonely, haven't you? So very alone." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had spent so many nights alone in this house, convincing myself that solitude was peaceful, that I preferred it this way. But hearing those words from an unseen intruder made the loneliness feel like a wound, raw, and exposed. It knew me in ways that felt far too intimate, as though it had been lurking in the shadows all along, watching, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "You don't belong here. I never asked for you. Leave me alone." But the entity only laughed, a low, haunting chuckle that echoed in my ears, filling the room with a dreadful resonance. The laughter faded, replaced once more by that terrible whisper. "You let me in the night you wished for someone to fill the emptiness. I am here to grant that wish." I felt a chill wash over me as memories flickered through my mind, of lonely evenings, of fleeting thoughts and silent pleas I barely acknowledged. Had I, in my loneliness, somehow summoned this thing? The very idea was insane, but as I stood there, pressed against the wall, staring at the dark handprint on my window, I realized that this wasn't a nightmare I could wake up from. This was real. This was happening. And it wasn't going to leave. I took a shuddering breath, desperately trying to ground myself. My mind raced with fragmented thoughts, each one darker than the last, but there was nowhere to hide, nowhere I could run to escape whatever had entered my life. The room felt colder now, the air thick with an unnatural chill that seemed to sink into my bones. I forced myself to stand, legs shaking, my back pressed against the wall. If this thing was here because of my loneliness, because of a wish I'd once foolishly whispered to myself, then I had to find a way to make it leave. The voice kept whispering, urging me to let down my guard, to give in. I clamped my hands over my ears, but it did nothing to stop the voice from crawling deeper into my thoughts. You don't have to be afraid. I'm here to keep you company, to protect you from the silence, from the emptiness. Its words felt like a poison, seeping into my mind, dulling my sense of reality. It was as if the more I listened, the less I could remember who I was, what was real, and what was the entity's twisted influence. My thoughts began to blur, fragments of my past flashing through my mind like broken pieces of glass, moments of solitude, fleeting images of nights spent alone, feeling as though no one in the world knew I existed. The thing was feeding off my memories, twisting them into something grotesque, something that bounded to me. No, I said, my voice hoarse, barely a whisper. I don't want you here. I never wanted this. The room grew darker, the shadows deepening, stretching across the walls and ceiling like an encroaching fog. The weight of its presence pressed down on me, making it hard to breathe, my chest tightening as if invisible hands were squeezing my ribs. I felt a cold, clammy sensation on my shoulder, and I looked down, horrified, to see a dark, skeletal hand resting there, its long fingers curling around my shoulder as though claiming me. The hand was translucent, flickering between visibility and darkness, like a ghostly shadow. I froze, unable to move, as the fingers tightened their grip, sending a wave of cold through my entire body. Don't fight it, the voice whispered, closer now, as if it were standing right beside me, breathing its words into my ear. Let me in, let me become a part of you. My skin crawled, every nerve screaming to break free, to run, but I was rooted to the spot, trapped in its grip. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to push it out of my mind, to focus on anything that might sever its connection to me. And then, in the depths of my mind, I remembered something, a ritual I'd once heard about, something to sever ties with a malevolent entity. It had sounded ridiculous at the time, something I'd brushed off as nonsense. But now, with this thing looming over me, its cold hand digging into my shoulder, it was my only chance. I took a shaky breath, trying to steady my voice as I recited the words, hoping against hope that they would work. I revoke you. I deny your presence. You are not welcome here. The words sounded feeble, barely more than a whisper, but I forced myself to repeat them, louder this time, drawing strength from every syllable. I revoke you. I deny your presence. You are not welcome here. The room seemed to shudder, the shadows flickering as though my words had somehow unsettled it. The grip on my shoulder loosened, and for the first time, I felt a hint of the entity's power weakening, a chink in its armor. But just as hope surged within me, the voice returned, its tone darker, angrier, seething with a hatred that chilled me to the core. You cannot deny me. You asked for me. You invited me in. My resolve faltered, but I held firm, repeating the words over and over, louder each time, with every ounce of strength I had left. The walls trembled, the dark handprint on the window faded in and out, as if it was struggling to hold on to its form. And then, in a flash, everything went silent. The air cleared, the shadows receded, and the handprint on the window vanished, leaving only a faint smudge where it had been. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight lift from my chest, the oppressive darkness retreating as quickly as it had come. But as I stood there, gasping in the sudden, eerie calm, I knew this wasn't over. I could feel its presence lurking, waiting in the corners of my mind, a lingering trace that no ritual could fully erase. It might be gone for now, but it was still out there, watching, waiting for the moment I would be weak enough to invite it in again. And in that moment, I realized the truth. It hadn't come from outside. It had come from within, feeding off my loneliness, my isolation, taking root in my own mind. And it would always be waiting. I stayed frozen in that room, the silence now so complete it felt oppressive in a new, different way. The air was thick with a lingering dread, as though the entity had only just retreated beyond the veil of sight, hiding, but still close enough to feel. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to return. I felt its presence as a weight on my shoulders, a shadow that had carved itself into my life. No ritual or desperate plea would make it truly vanish. I knew that now it had been summoned from my deepest fears, my own minded sanctuary. Eventually, I forced myself to move, my legs stiff and numb as I left the room and headed toward the bathroom. I splashed water on my face, trying to erase the cold, clammy feeling that lingered on my skin from where it had touched me. But the face staring back at me in the mirror seemed different, paler, eyes hollowed by a sleeplessness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. I leaned closer, examining my reflection. There was something off, a faint smudge of shadow beneath my skin that hadn't been there before. My heart stuttered as a chilling thought crept into my mind. Had it left something behind? Was a piece of it still embedded in me, like a dormant infection waiting to awaken? Stop it, I whispered to myself, shaking my head. You're just scaring yourself. But the words rang hollow. I could feel its essence, faint but unmistakable, lingering just beneath the surface of my mind. The silence around me was thick, pressing in from all sides, amplifying every small sound, every creak of the house settling. I felt trapped in my own home, a prisoner in a place that once felt like a sanctuary. Now, it felt more like a cage, a place where the shadows held secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to uncover. I tried to push it out of my mind, to rationalize the experience, but every thought seemed to spiral back to that nightmarish encounter. My gaze drifted back to the window, and a shiver ran down my spine. The handprint was gone, but the memory of it remained, burned into my mind like a scar. Days turned into weeks, and the feeling of dread never truly left me. I went about my life as best as I could, trying to reestablish some semblance of normalcy. But every night, as darkness settled over my home, I felt that creeping chill, as if the entity was watching, waiting for me to let my guard down. Sleep became a battleground, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurred. I would wake up in the dead of night, drenched in sweat, convinced that I heard whispers or felt the weight of that skeletal hand pressing down on my shoulder. I told myself it was only in my mind, a lingering echo of fear. But part of me knew better. Then, one night, something happened that shattered the fragile normalcy I had clung to. It was late, well past midnight, and I was lying in bed, tossing and turning, unable to fall asleep. The room was dark, but the faint light from a street lamp outside cast soft shadows on the walls. I was about to close my eyes and force myself to sleep when I heard a sound, a soft, barely there scratching, like fingernails dragging across wood. I froze, my heart pounding as I strained to listen, my mind racing. The sound was coming from the hallway, just outside my bedroom door. It was subtle, slow, as though something, or someone, was carefully, methodically testing the barrier between us. A cold sweat broke out on my skin as the scratching grew louder, more insistent. The memories of that night came flooding back, the whispered voice, the skeletal handprint on the window. My breath hitched as the scratching stopped, replaced by the faintest whisper. "Let me in." My heart raced, panic overtaking every rational thought. The voice was unmistakable, soft yet full of menace, slipping through the cracks in my mind like a tendril of darkness. I stared at the door, my hand gripping the edge of my blanket as though it could somehow protect me. Then, I heard the doorknob rattle, a soft metallic click as it turned slightly, as if someone were testing it from the other side. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, but I was paralyzed, gripped by a terror so profound it felt as if my very soul had frozen. The door creaked open an inch, and I saw the darkness in the hallway deepen, as though the shadows themselves had come alive, spilling into my room like an inky fog. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, filling my head until I felt like I was drowning in it. "You let me in once. You can't keep me out forever." I stumbled back, my mind a frantic whirl of horror and desperation. The shadows pooled at my feet, swirling around me as if trying to drag me down, to consume me. I had fought this thing once before, driven it away, barely. But now, it was back, stronger, more relentless, and I could feel my own willpower slipping, my sanity fraying at the edges. In a final act of desperation, I bolted from the room, running through the darkened house with no clear plan, only the primal urge to escape. I burst through the front door, feeling the chill night air wash over me, grounding me, pulling me back to reality. The street outside was silent, empty, the quiet only broken by the distant hum of city sounds. I took a few shaky breaths, glancing back at the house. Through the windows, the interior looked dark, almost peaceful, as if nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened. But I knew better. I could feel it lurking inside, that presence, waiting for me to return. For a long time, I just stood there, watching, half expecting to see a figure materialize in the window, a shadow stretching out toward me. But there was nothing, only silence, a stillness that was somehow more terrifying than any movement. I knew then that I could never go back, not as long as it was still there, waiting, watching, feeding off my loneliness, my fear. This was no ordinary haunting, no simple ghost that could be banished with a few words. It was a part of me now, woven into the fabric of my being, a darkness that would follow me no matter where I went. And as I stood there, feeling the weight of its gaze, I realized with chilling clarity that I had become its home. I stood on the street, shivering as the night air bit through my thin pajamas, but I couldn't bring myself to step away from the house. My whole life was inside those walls, my possessions, my memories, even the faint, comforting marks on the door frames that charted the years I had spent there. And yet, I knew that if I crossed that threshold again, it would be waiting for me. The street was eerily silent, with no cars passing and no one else awake. For the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of displacement, like I didn't belong in this world anymore. The boundaries between me and that thing had blurred, leaving me standing somewhere in between, no longer safe in my own reality, but not fully lost in its darkness either. I tried to recall my last encounter with the entity, piecing together the memories like fragments of a bad dream. I had seen it, felt it, been marked by it in ways I couldn't understand, and I knew that it was more than just a passing haunt. It was ancient, a force that existed beyond human understanding, feeding off my fear and isolation. For hours, I sat on the curb across the street, watching the darkened windows, waiting for some sign, some final confirmation that I had truly lost my home to this entity. But the house remained quiet, its windows blank, holding secrets that only I knew. Finally, the first rays of dawn started creeping over the horizon, casting a soft, golden light over the street. The warmth gave me a strange sense of courage, a reminder that the darkness couldn't last forever. And yet, I knew that as night returned, so would the creature. It would wait for me to let my guard down, to fall into that same trap of familiarity, of thinking that I could somehow reclaim my home. I forced myself to stand, every muscle in my body stiff from sitting for so long, and made my way down the street. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to get away, to put as much distance between myself and the memories that clung to that house. But even as I walked, a sinking feeling settled in my chest. No matter where I went, the memories would follow, the imprint of its touch, the echo of its voice whispering in my mind. Over the next few days, I stayed at a friend's apartment, trying to explain my sudden need to leave without revealing the full extent of what I had experienced. The shadows beneath my eyes grew darker, my mind constantly on edge, as if I were being watched even here. The entity had marked me somehow, and I could feel it, like a phantom limb itching beneath my skin. Its presence lingered, subtle yet inescapable, a constant reminder that it was only a matter of time before it found me again. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into routines, anything to keep my mind occupied and my thoughts away from the haunting. But every time I closed my eyes, I could still feel it there, just at the edge of my awareness, waiting. I began to wonder if it was truly bound to the house, or if my leaving had only delayed the inevitable. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the familiar, gnawing dread settled in, I felt a chill run through me. There, just faintly, was that same scratching sound, barely audible but unmistakable. It was as though it had followed me across the city, across every attempt to escape. I knew then that it hadn't been tied to the house, it was tied to me. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath as the realization dawned. The entity had seeped into my very soul, binding itself to my fears, my loneliness. There would be no escape, no way to sever the connection without facing it, without acknowledging the darkness it had brought out in me. And as I stood there, feeling its presence swell around me, I knew that I could run forever, but I would never be free. As the days bled into each other, I found myself slipping into a strange, uneasy rhythm. Every night, as darkness fell, I felt it drawing closer. Sometimes it was just a faint whisper at the edge of my mind, other times it felt as though cold, invisible fingers were brushing against my skin. I grew used to the sensation, though it never stopped sending a chill down my spine. Each evening, I checked the locks, closed the curtains, and lit every light in the apartment, trying to keep the shadows at bay. But the darkness still found its way in, creeping through the gaps and cracks, wrapping around me until it felt like I was suffocating. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every time I closed my eyes, it felt as though I were inviting the entity in, giving it permission to invade the sanctuary of my mind. The fear was maddening, a constant gnawing at the edges of my sanity. I tried to keep up appearances, to act like nothing was wrong, but my friends noticed the change. They asked if I was okay, if I needed help, but what could I say? How could I explain that I was haunted by something invisible, something that no one else could see or feel? I started avoiding people altogether, afraid that they would sense it too, that they might become tainted by my burden. One night, as I sat alone in the dim glow of my apartment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't keep running forever. I couldn't live my life in constant fear, waiting for the next sign, the next whisper. I knew what I had to do, even if the very thought sent a spike of terror through me. I had to confront it. I didn't know how, didn't know what it would entail, but I sensed that the entity was feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every ounce of dread I harbored. If I could face it, truly face it, without fear, maybe, just maybe, I could break the hold it had over me. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I turned off all the lights, plunging the room into total darkness. My heart raced, my body tense with the primal urge to flee, but I forced myself to stay still, to breathe, to wait. I closed my eyes, focusing on the steady rhythm of my heartbeat, trying to quiet the panic rising within me. Then, in the silence, I felt it, a subtle shift in the air, a presence that had been lurking all along, just beyond the edge of perception. It was there, with me, as if it had always been waiting for this moment. I opened my eyes, and there it was. The figure was barely discernible, a vague shape that seemed to melt into the shadows, its form shifting and flickering as though it were made of smoke. Its face was obscured, hidden behind a veil of darkness, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me, cold and unrelenting. It didn't move, didn't speak. It just watched, a silent predator waiting for me to make the first move. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain calm. The figure tilted its head, a subtle, almost mocking gesture, as though it found my question amusing. For a long moment, there was only silence, and then, in a voice as soft as a breath, it answered, "You know." The words sent a shiver through me, a truth that I had known but refused to acknowledge. It wasn't after my life, wasn't interested in harming me physically. It wanted something deeper, something that went beyond flesh and bone. It wanted my mind, my will. It wanted me to give in, to surrender to the darkness that it embodied, to let it fill the empty spaces inside me. "No," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "You can't have me." The figure seemed to waver, its form rippling as though in response to my defiance. I felt a surge of strength, a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, I could fight this thing, that I could reclaim the parts of myself it had taken. But then, its presence intensified, pressing down on me with a force that felt like drowning. The room grew colder, darker, as if every bit of warmth and light were being sucked away, leaving me alone in a void of despair. I felt my resolve falter, the edges of my mind fraying as its voice echoed through my thoughts. "You let me in. You belonged to me the moment you invited me in." The words struck deep, resonating with a truth I couldn't deny. I had opened the door that night, let it enter my life, my thoughts, my very soul. I had given it a foothold, and now it was clinging to me, refusing to let go. "No," I whispered again, my voice filled with a desperation I could no longer hide. "I won't let you take me." The figure shifted, drawing closer, until I could feel its icy breath against my skin. It leaned in, its presence filling my mind, drowning me in darkness, and I felt myself slipping, my grip on reality loosening as its voice filled my thoughts. "You can't escape me. I am every shadow, every fear. I am the darkness you can never outrun." In a final, desperate act, I closed my eyes, focusing on the small, flickering light within me, the last remnants of my own will. I held onto it, clinging to that spark as though it were my lifeline, refusing to let it be snuffed out. I don't know how long I stood there, locked in that silent battle, holding onto the last shreds of myself as the entity pressed down, relentless, unyielding. But finally, something shifted. The weight lifted, the presence receded, and when I opened my eyes, the figure was gone, the room filled with the soft, pale light of dawn. I fell to my knees, drained, empty, but still whole. I had faced it, stared into the depths of my own fear, and somehow, I had survived. But as I sat there, trembling in the morning light, I knew that it wasn't truly gone. It was a part of me now, a shadow lurking in the corners of my mind, waiting, watching, a reminder of the darkness I had invited in. And though I had survived, I would never be the same. The final night. As the sun set on the quiet suburban neighborhood, a young couple, Emily and Michael, made their final preparations for their big move. After months of careful planning, they were finally leaving this house behind, the place they had called home for the past 5 years. As they walked through the empty rooms, memories of their time there flooded their minds. The laughter, the tears, the celebrations, all of it was about to become part of the past. But there was a palpable sense of unease that neither of them could shake. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Michael asked, giving Emily's hand a gentle squeeze. Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "I am. I can't help but feel like we're forgetting something. Or someone." The couple finished their final sweep of the house, double-checking that every light was turned off and every window was locked. As they stepped out the front door, Emily paused, her gaze drawn to the shadows that seemed to dance in the corner of her eye. "Did you see that?" she whispered, her heart pounding. Michael followed her gaze, but the shadows had vanished. "It's just your imagination, babe. Come on, let's get going. The moving truck will be here soon." As the couple loaded the last few boxes into their car, Emily couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that had been plaguing her all day. The house, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and oppressive. "Michael, I really think we should do one more check before we go," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael offered her a reassuring smile. "We've gone through this place with a fine-toothed comb. I promise, there's nothing left behind." Still, Emily couldn't ignore the nagging sensation that they were being watched. As they stepped back inside, the air seemed to grow thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. Emily ran her hand along the banister, her fingers tracing the familiar grooves. This doesn't feel right, you know? I can't shake the feeling that we're not alone." Michael wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close. "It's okay, babe. We're just feeling nostalgic, that's all. This place has so many memories for us. But it's time to move on, to start a new chapter." Just then, a loud thud echoed from the kitchen, followed by the sound of shattering glass. Emily jumped, her eyes wide with fear. "What was that?" she whispered, her grip tightening on Michael's sleeve. Michael quickly ushered her towards the front door. "Probably just a stray cat or something. Come on, let's get out of here." As they hurried to the car, Emily couldn't help but glance back at the house. The shadows seemed to shift and sway, as if something or someone was watching them leave. Once safely inside the car, Emily gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles turning white. "I don't understand, Michael. Why does it feel like we're being watched? Like something is following us?" Michael reached over and placed his hand on hers, giving it a gentle squeeze. "I don't know, babe. But we're out of there now, and that's all that matters. Let's just focus on the road ahead and our new start." As they drove away, Emily couldn't help but glance in the rearview mirror. The house seemed to loom in the distance, its shadows stretching out like skeletal fingers, grasping at their taillights. She shuddered, turning her attention back to the road. The drive to their new home was filled with an uneasy silence. Both Emily and Michael were lost in their own thoughts, wondering what had just transpired in that empty house. Had it truly been their imagination, or had there been something darker lurking in the shadows? As they pulled up to their new place, Emily let out a deep breath. "Well, here we are. A fresh start, just like you said." She forced a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Michael could see the lingering unease in her expression. "Hey, it's going to be okay. We're safe now, I promise." He leaned over and kissed her cheek, then turned to grab the first box from the back seat. But as Emily watched him, she couldn't shake the feeling that they had left something or someone behind. The shadows of the past seemed to cling to them, unwilling to let go. That night, as Emily and Michael settled into their new home, the unease that had plagued them only grew stronger. Emily found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, her senses on high alert. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. As they prepared for bed, Emily noticed a strange mark on her arm, a faint, reddish outline in the shape of a hand. She ran her fingers over it, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Michael, look at this. Where did this come from?" Michael examined the mark, his face etched with concern. "I don't know, babe. Maybe you just caught it on something earlier?" He gently kissed the mark, then pulled Emily close. "Either way, it's nothing to worry about. We're safe here." But as they lay in bed, Emily found it impossible to sleep. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and sway, as if something was watching them. She could have sworn she heard the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing from the hallway. Shaking her head, she tried to push the thoughts aside. "It's just my imagination," she whispered to herself. "We're safe here. We're safe." Yet, deep down, she knew that something wasn't right. The house, their new sanctuary, felt tainted by the darkness they had left behind. The past had followed them, and it was determined to keep them from moving on. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, Emily finally drifted off to an uneasy sleep, her dreams haunted by the shadowy figures that seemed to lurk in every corner of their new home. That night, as Emily and Michael settled into their new home, the unease that had plagued them only grew stronger. Emily found herself constantly glancing over her shoulder, her senses on high alert. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were not alone. As they prepared for bed, Emily noticed a strange mark on her arm, a faint, reddish outline in the shape of a hand. She ran her fingers over it, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Michael, look at this. Where did this come from?" Michael examined the mark, his face etched with concern. "I don't know, babe. Maybe you just caught it on something earlier?" He gently kissed the mark, then pulled Emily close. "Either way, it's nothing to worry about. We're safe here." But as they lay in bed, Emily found it impossible to sleep. The shadows in the room seemed to shift and sway, as if something was watching them. She could have sworn she heard the faint sound of a child's laughter echoing from the hallway. Shaking her head, she tried to push the thoughts aside. "It's just my imagination," she whispered to herself. "We're safe here. We're safe." Yet, deep down, she knew that something wasn't right. The house, their new sanctuary, felt tainted by the darkness they had left behind. The past had followed them, and it was determined to keep them from moving on. As the first rays of dawn crept through the window, Emily finally drifted off to an uneasy sleep, her dreams haunted by the shadowy figures that seemed to lurk in every corner of their new home. Hope your dreams are filled with fear. Good night.